The bronze lies in darkness, crushed beneath stone, coral, sand, and 2,000 years of silence, while above it the Aegean keeps moving as if nothing extraordinary has happened. Fish pass over the wreck, currents drag fine grit through broken amphorae and marble limbs. Somewhere among the scattered cargo of a vanished ship, inside a lump so corroded it barely resembles anything made by human hands, a machine waits with the patience of the dead. It has no shining surfaces now. No polished dials, no wooden case, no turning handle that catches the sun. It is green, brittle, swollen by the sea, and almost mute. Yet hidden inside that ruin are wheels with carefully cut teeth, rings that once carried inscriptions, and a design so intricate that when modern investigators finally begin to understand it, the past seems to shift beneath their feet. The object will become known as the Antikythera mechanism, but at the moment of its rediscovery it is not a name, not a legend, not even a recognized instrument. It is only debris from a wreck found near a small Greek island between Kythera and Crete, a place where the sea can look bright and harmless from a distance, then turn violent with a speed that has frightened sailors for centuries. The island gives the machine its modern name, but it does not explain it. Nothing about the island explains why a device of bronze gears, astronomical cycles, calendars, and predictions should be resting on the seabed among luxury cargo from the ancient world. Nothing about the first glance explains why this wreck contains what may be the most complex surviving machine from antiquity. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. Because this is not just a story about one strange artifact. It is a story about a world that knew more than it managed to preserve, about knowledge that did not disappear all at once, but slipped through history in fragments, quotations, burned libraries, lost workshops, and wrecked ships. The Antikythera mechanism is not mysterious because it has no explanation at all. It is mysterious because every explanation opens another door. At first, the setting seems almost too cinematic to be real. Around the year 1900, sponge divers working in the waters near Antikythera descend into the blue and find not sponges, but a graveyard of objects. There are bronze statues, marble sculptures, fine vessels, jewellery, glassware, and the remains of a ship that once carried wealth across the Mediterranean. The divers are not archaeologists, they are men of breath, muscle, risk, and endurance, using dangerous equipment in a sea that can kill quickly and quietly. What they discover belongs to a lost moment of trade, conquest, collecting, and display. A Roman-era vessel, probably carrying Greek art and luxury goods westward, has gone down with its cargo, preserving by accident what history would otherwise have scattered. Among the spectacular objects, the machine does not immediately command attention. That is one of the strangest details of its story. Marble and bronze bodies speak more clearly to the eye. A statue announces itself even when broken. A face, a torso, a hand, a horse, a god, a hero. These are recognizable forms, but a corroded lump of bronze and wood does not announce genius. It looks like the kind of thing a museum might place aside until someone has time to examine it, and for a while, that is almost what happens. The most astonishing artifact in the wreck is not the most beautiful, not the most complete, not the easiest to understand. It is the thing that has to be looked at twice, then again, then with better tools, then with entirely new ways of seeing. What survives in the record suggests that the mechanism was once housed in a wooden box, small enough to be carried, but complex enough to represent moving patterns in the sky. It was not a giant public machine standing in a temple courtyard. It was not a water clock towering over a city square. It was intimate, compact, and intellectual. A user could turn it, read it, follow pointers across dials, and perhaps watch time itself become mechanical. The sun, the moon, calendars, eclipse cycles, athletic games, and the unequal dance of lunar motion may all have been brought together into one bronze instrument. That alone is startling. But the deeper shock is chronological. The mechanism is ancient, usually dated to the 2nd or 1st century BCE. Yet its gearwork is so sophisticated that for a long time it seemed to belong to a much later age. This is where caution matters. The machine is not evidence for modern technology in the ancient world. It is not proof of electricity, lost industrial civilizations, or impossible visitors from elsewhere. Those claims belong to popular fantasy, not to the evidence. The real mystery is more interesting because it is grounded. The Greeks of the Hellenistic world had astronomy, geometry, metalworking, mechanical toys, mathematical models, and a hunger to map the heavens. They knew how to calculate cycles. They built instruments. They wrote about spheres, planets, ratios, and the structure of the cosmos. The Antikythera mechanism does not come from nowhere. Yet no single explanation fully accounts for its survival, its sophistication, and the silence around comparable devices. It fits into the ancient world, but it also stretches the edges of what that world has left behind. That tension gives the machine its power. It is not simply ahead of its time. That phrase is too easy, and in some ways misleading. The mechanism belongs to its time, but it reveals a part of that time that is mostly missing. Imagine judging an entire civilization's music from one broken instrument, or its literature from a single damaged page. The Antikythera mechanism may be just such a remnant, not a miracle, but a survivor. Its gears whisper that ancient craft traditions could be far more elaborate than the surviving record suggests. Its inscriptions hint at a user who needed guidance, perhaps because the device was meant to teach, demonstrate, calculate, or impress. Its very existence forces a question that scholars still debate: was this machine a rare masterpiece, or the last visible trace of a larger lost tradition? The sea has made that question harder. Salt water does not preserve bronze gently. It swells wood, fuses metal, consumes surfaces, and turns clean edges into mineral confusion. The machine did not emerge from the wreck as a complete device waiting to be wound. It came up as fragments, cracked and distorted, with gears embedded inside corrosion. Teeth are missing, plates are broken, inscriptions are incomplete. The original front display remains partly reconstructed, partly inferred. Every model of the mechanism must balance what is visible against what is probable. The evidence remains incomplete, and that incompleteness is not a flaw in the story. It is the heart of it. Still, the fragments are enough to disturb the neat timeline many people once carried in their minds. For centuries, complex geared mechanisms were associated with medieval astronomical clocks and later, European engineering. Then this ancient object surfaced from the seabed, carrying within it a technology of calculation far older than expected. It did not rewrite all of history overnight, but it did demand a correction. Ancient science was not only abstract thought written on scrolls. In at least one case, it became a machine of interlocking bronze parts, where theory met teeth, axles, pins, pointers, and dials. There is something almost haunting about that. The mechanism reduces the heavens to motion inside a box, yet the box itself is found broken at the bottom of the sea. It tries to predict celestial order, but its own fate is chaos, shipwreck, burial, corrosion, rediscovery, argument. It may have been made for a wealthy patron, a scholar, a teacher, a navigator, or a collector of wonders. It may have passed through several hands before being loaded aboard the doomed vessel. It may have been admired, misunderstood, repaired, or used until parts wore down. Scholars still debate these possibilities because the machine gives evidence, but not confession. So the story begins not in a workshop, not yet among mathematicians and astronomers, but underwater, where an ancient ship lies broken on a dangerous route through the Aegean. The machine's first modern act is not to explain itself, but to hide in plain sight among statues and wreckage, before anyone can ask who made it, or why, or how its gears once moved. There is the older question of how it reached that place at all. A machine designed to measure time has crossed into a realm where time nearly erased it, and the sea around Antikythera, glittering and treacherous, becomes the first keeper of its secret. The sea route past Antikythera is not a gentle road of water. It sits between larger islands and open stretches of the Aegean, where wind, current, and rock can turn a voyage into a calculation of risk. For ancient sailors, this part of the Mediterranean is both familiar and dangerous, a passage threaded through worlds of trade, conquest, taxation, and display. Ships move through it carrying wine, oil, grain, bronze, marble, glass, slaves, soldiers, merchants, ambassadors, and objects made to prove that one civilization has inherited the treasures of another. Somewhere along this route, a large vessel goes down. It does not sink into myth immediately. It simply breaks, settles, and begins its long transformation from disaster into archaeology. The ship is usually understood as a Roman-era cargo vessel, probably wrecked in the 1st century BCE, though the exact circumstances remain uncertain. What survives in the record suggests that it was carrying a remarkable collection of luxury goods, many of them Greek in origin or style, toward the western Mediterranean. The cargo includes marble sculptures, bronze statues, fine glassware, amphorae, coins, furniture fittings, and other high-value objects. This is not the cargo of a humble coastal trader moving a few jars between neighbouring ports. It feels like a shipment connected to wealth, collecting, and the Roman appetite for Greek art. By this period, Rome has already drawn much of the Greek-speaking Eastern Mediterranean into its political and military orbit, and Greek masterpieces, copies, and workshop products are moving west in large numbers. A ship like this is not merely transporting objects. It is transporting cultural prestige. That background matters because the Antikythera mechanism does not rest alone in the wreck. It belongs, physically at least, to a cargo of elite things. The statues are not just decoration. They are evidence of a world in which the art, learning, and technical skill of older Greek centres are being gathered, bought, seized, commissioned, and relocated. The Roman world admires Greek culture even as it dominates Greek lands. Villas in Italy fill with Greek sculpture. Educated Romans learn Greek literature and philosophy. Generals and aristocrats display imported art as proof of taste and power. In that atmosphere, a compact astronomical machine could have been a curiosity, a scientific instrument, a teaching device, or a prestige object, something valuable enough to travel alongside bronzes and marbles. The evidence remains incomplete, but the company it keeps on the seabed hints that it was not ordinary cargo. The wreck also shows how easily knowledge can become dependent on chance. If the ship had reached its destination, the mechanism might have entered a Roman household, a library, a school, or a private collection. It might have been repaired, copied, admired, ignored, or eventually melted down for bronze. If it had sunk in deeper water, it might never have been found. If the corrosion had destroyed just a little more, the gears might have remained invisible. The survival of the machine is not a triumph of preservation so much as a narrow accident. The sea nearly erased it, then protected enough of it to make rediscovery possible. The ancient ship likely meets its end in violence, though not necessarily human violence. A storm is the simplest explanation, and perhaps the most plausible one, but scholars still debate the exact cause because a wreck rarely preserves the moment of its own destruction cleanly. The channel near Antikythera can be treacherous. Sudden weather, poor visibility, night sailing, overloaded cargo, navigation error, or damage from rocks could all have played a role. Ancient ships are strong in the ways they need to be, but they are not invulnerable. Their hulls are wooden, their steering is limited. Their ability to survive a hard collision or a prolonged storm depends on crew skill, luck, and the mood of the sea. A vessel heavy with statues and amphorae is a valuable thing, but value does not keep it afloat. There is lesser-known brutality in the modern discovery as well. The sponge divers who first encounter the wreck are working in one of the most dangerous professions of their time. Around 1900, diving technology allows men to descend deeper and stay longer than breath-hold diving permits. But it also exposes them to decompression sickness, paralysis, panic, and death. The equipment is heavy. Air arrives through hoses. Communication is crude. A diver on the seabed depends on men above, on pumps, on signals, on discipline, and on luck. When the Antikythera wreck is excavated, the human cost is real. Some divers are injured, and at least one dies. The ancient wreck, already born of disaster, demands a second price from the modern world before giving up its treasures. The first reports from the seabed are almost uncanny. A diver surfaces and speaks of bodies below, and for a moment the men above may imagine corpses, a drowned crowd frozen underwater. What he has seen are statues, human forms scattered across the seafloor, their limbs and faces looming in the filtered light. It is a fitting beginning for a wreck that confuses categories from the start. Art looks like death. Cargo looks like a submerged city. A corroded machine looks like a meaningless lump. The sea distorts everything, and the wreck must be translated before it can be understood. Objects begin to rise from the water, and the story briefly belongs to spectacle. Statues are lifted, studied, restored, and displayed. The finds attract attention because they are beautiful, and because they connect modern Greece to the deep prestige of the ancient Mediterranean. The Antikythera Ephebi, a bronze youth from the wreck, becomes one of the most famous sculptures recovered. Marble figures emerge in fragments. Amphorae help date and contextualize the cargo. Coins offer clues to chronology. The wreck becomes one of the great underwater archaeological discoveries of its age, even before anyone fully understands the mechanism. Yet underwater archaeology at the time is still young. The excavation does not proceed with the careful grid systems, conservation protocols, and recording methods that later archaeologists would expect. This is not because the discovery lacks importance, but because the field itself is still developing. Many objects are recovered under difficult conditions, and some context is lost. For the Antikythera mechanism, that loss is especially painful. Its precise position in the wreck, its association with particular objects, the orientation of fragments, and the possible remains of its container could have helped answer questions that remain open. Instead, The machine reaches the surface already separated from many of the details that might have spoken for it. The cargo points toward a world of movement. The Mediterranean of the late Hellenistic and Roman Republican periods is not divided into isolated civilizations sitting neatly in their own regions. It is a connected sea of ports, languages, debts, wars, scholars, artisans, pirates, soldiers, and patrons. Ideas travel with people. Instruments travel with books. Craftsmen follow money. A mechanism designed in one intellectual centre might be built in another, bought in a third, and shipped toward a fourth. This matters because the object's origin cannot simply be read from the place where it sank. Antikythera is the place of loss, not necessarily the place of birth. Even the cargo may have been assembled from different sources. Some objects could be older than the shipwreck by decades or more. Artworks can remain in circulation for generations. A bronze statue made in one period can be collected in another. A marble copy can imitate an older Greek type while being carved closer to the time of shipment. The mechanism itself may not have been brand new when it went down. It could have been a treasured object already used for years. It could have been damaged, refurbished, or transported as part of a private collection. No single explanation fully accounts for every piece of the cargo, and the wreck resists simple labelling. Still, the wreck tells a coherent larger story. It belongs to an age when Roman power is drawing the eastern Mediterranean westward, not only through armies and taxes but through objects. Greek science and art do not vanish under Rome, they circulate, sometimes flourishing, sometimes being uprooted. The Antikythera mechanism may represent exactly that kind of circulation. It is Greek in intellectual heritage, found on a ship probably connected to Roman movement, sunk in Greek waters, recovered by modern Greek divers, and studied by an international community of scholars. Its biography is Mediterranean from beginning to end. And beneath all of this is the physical reality of the wreck itself. A ship hits trouble, cargo shifts, wood cracks, men may shout into wind and spray, heavy objects break loose, amphorae smash, marble bodies slide and strike each other, bronze shapes disappear under foam. The mechanism, perhaps packed in a wooden case, perhaps stored among other precious goods, is thrown into a chaos it was never built to endure. It sinks with the rest, not as the centerpiece of a mystery, but as one object among many in a disaster no one expects to be remembered. For centuries, the sea continues its work. Wood decays, metal corrodes, marble stains, sand moves in slow curtains. The ship loses its identity while preserving its evidence. The machine that once modelled cycles of the heavens becomes part of another cycle entirely burial, alteration, concealment, rediscovery. By the time human hands reach it again, the wreck has become less like a sunken vessel and more like a compressed archive, damaged but not empty. And inside that archive, almost overlooked among the beautiful ruins, waits the first impossible clue, not a statue, not a coin, not a weapon, but a gear. The first impossible clue does not arrive with a trumpet blast. It appears slowly, almost awkwardly, in the quiet after the spectacle. The divers have brought up statues, amphorae, bronze and marble fragments, objects that museums know how to admire and scholars know how to classify. Then there is the strange corroded mass, fragile and unpromising, a lump that seems at first to belong more to decay than to design. It is placed among the finds, conserved as best as anyone can manage, and for a brief time it remains exactly what the sea has made it appear to be, an encrusted piece of wreckage from a ship rich in far more beautiful things. But corrosion cracks, surfaces split, edges reveal themselves. In 1902, as the fragments are being examined, someone notices something that should not be there. Inside the bronze mass are the remains of toothed wheels, not rough notches, not decorative edges, not accidental patterns formed by corrosion, but gear teeth. A circular form has been cut with intention. Another piece suggests interlocking movement. The object is not merely metal scrap, it has mechanism inside it. And mechanism changes everything. The realization is unsettling because ancient artifacts usually announce their category before they explain their purpose. A sword is a sword even when rusted. A statue is a statue even when headless. A coin can be read, compared, dated. But a gear train from the ancient Mediterranean does not fit comfortably into the expectations of the early 20th century. Mechanical clocks with complex gearing belong, in the common historical imagination of that time, to medieval and early modern Europe. Precision instruments belong even later. The idea that a wreck from the 1st century BCE might contain a compact-geared astronomical device seems almost unreasonable. Yet the bronze refuses to become something simpler. Early interpretations move cautiously, and sometimes incorrectly, because the evidence is so damaged. The fragments are incomplete, and the machine's original form is hidden under corrosion. Scholars recognize that the object must be technical, perhaps astronomical, but its full purpose remains difficult to grasp. Some see connections with astrolabes or navigational devices. Others focus on calendrical possibilities. The object's inscriptions are partly visible, but much is unreadable. The gears are there, yet their arrangement is not immediately clear. What survives in the record suggests that the early investigators stand before a thing with too much intelligence inside it, and too little intact surface to explain itself. This is one reason the Antikythera mechanism has remained so compelling. It does not simply produce a mystery because no one studies it. On the contrary, it becomes mysterious because the more carefully it is studied, the more deliberate it appears. A vague curiosity might have faded, a misidentified lump might have been forgotten. But gears demand relationships. Teeth imply ratios. Ratios imply calculation. Calculation implies a maker who understands not only metal but time, cycles, and prediction. Each small recognition pushes the object farther away from ordinary cargo and closer to a lost technical world. The device breaks into named fragments over time, and those fragments become the foundation of modern study. Fragment A, the largest, contains much of the surviving gearwork. Fragment B preserves important rear dial material. Smaller fragments hold inscriptions and traces of plates. The names are plain, almost dry, but the pieces are anything but simple. Their broken edges represent both loss and access. Without damage, the interior might have remained hidden longer. Because the mechanism is fractured, investigators can glimpse gear layers that were never meant to be seen. Destruction becomes a form of revelation, though a cruel one. There is a surprising intimacy in the surviving details. The teeth are small, the wheels are thin. This is not heavy industrial machinery. It is delicate bronze work, planned with geometric care and cut by hand. The teeth are not perfect by modern machine standards, but they are astonishingly consistent for an ancient handmade device. The maker must have understood how one wheel's motion could be converted into another's, how cycles could be embodied in ratios, and how a user's single action might drive a coordinated display. The mechanism is not just a container of knowledge, it is knowledge translated into touch. Yet the earliest decades of study cannot fully unlock it. The machine's appearance is too compromised, and the tools available to scholars are limited. Surface inspection can show inscriptions and visible gears, but the interior remains partly inaccessible. Conservation is necessary, but intrusive handling could damage the object. The very material that preserves the fragments also conceals them. Bronze corrosion becomes both enemy and shield. It hides letters, freezes gears, and creates false shapes. Scholars still debate certain reconstructions today, and in those early years the uncertainty is far greater. The broader intellectual climate also matters. At the beginning of the 20th century, many scholars admire ancient Greek mathematics and philosophy, but practical mechanical complexity is often imagined as less developed. Ancient science is seen, too often, as theoretical rather than technical, brilliant in geometry but limited in machinery. The Antikythera fragments challenge that division. Here is a device that appears to join mathematical astronomy with skilled metalwork. It suggests a craftsman or workshop capable of producing a physical model of celestial cycles, not merely describing them in words. The first great shift comes when researchers begin to think of the mechanism not as an isolated puzzle of gears, but as an astronomical calculator. The inscriptions help push in that direction. So do the dial traces. The device appears to involve calendrical scales and celestial periods. This does not mean every feature is understood at once. It means the machine begins to enter the correct universe of explanation. It is not a clock in the ordinary modern sense, measuring hours through the day. It is a cycle machine, a model of longer rhythms, months, years, eclipses, perhaps games, perhaps the complex motion of the moon. That distinction is crucial. The mechanism is not trying to make ancient life run on minutes. It is trying to make the heavens legible. There is a small irony in this. The ancient user may have turned the device with relative ease, guided by labels and pointers. The modern world, with museums, universities, cameras, chemistry, and eventually scanning technology, struggles for generations to understand what one trained ancient owner may have known at a glance. The object reverses the usual confidence of modernity. It does not make the ancient world look magical. It makes the modern observer feel late to a conversation already underway 2,000 years ago. Still, caution remains essential. The mechanism is extraordinary, but it's not evidence that every Greek city possessed hidden machines of equal complexity. Archaeology survives unevenly. Bronze is valuable and often recycled. Wood decays. Technical manuals vanish. Workshops leave fewer traces than temples. The absence of many similar devices may reflect rarity, loss, or both. No single explanation fully accounts for this. The Antikythera mechanism could be a masterpiece from a specialized tradition, or the one surviving member of a broader family of devices destroyed by time. The evidence points toward sophistication, but not toward fantasy. As the fragments are studied, the object slowly changes identity. It begins as wreckage, becomes curiosity, then a geared device, then an astronomical instrument, then something even more provocative, a window into the practical side of ancient science. It forces scholars to connect fields that are often separated: archaeology, philology, astronomy, mathematics, metallurgy, history of technology. A gear tooth becomes a historical document. A scratched inscription becomes a user interface. A broken dial becomes an argument about what ancient people could calculate, teach, and imagine. The first impossible clue, then, is not simply that gears exist inside the corroded bronze. It is that the gears are meaningful. They belong to a system. They carry the logic of cycles. They imply a vanished maker who understood the sky well enough to miniaturize it. And once that becomes clear, the wreck near Antikythera is no longer only a sunken cargo of art and luxury. It is the resting place of a machine that turns the ancient cosmos into a mechanical problem, then leaves the modern world to solve it from fragments. What remains of the Antikythera mechanism is not a machine in the way the mind wants a machine to be. There is no complete face, no smooth casing, no handle ready to turn, no clean sequence of parts laid out like a diagram. There are fragments, and the fragments have suffered. Bronze has expanded and cracked under the chemistry of the sea. Wood has mostly vanished, surviving only as traces and impressions. Thin plates have warped. Gear wheels have fused together. Inscriptions have broken into partial words and incomplete lines. The object that once made time readable has itself become almost unreadable, and this is why every reconstruction begins with humility. The largest surviving piece, often called Fragment A, is the heart of the visible gearwork. It holds a dense cluster of wheels, axles, and plates pressed together by corrosion. Even damaged, it gives the strongest impression of the original machine's complexity. One sees circles within circles, teeth along edges, openings where shafts once passed, and traces of an arrangement that was compact but not crude. It is tempting to imagine the mechanism as a neat skeleton of bronze gears, but the real fragment is more difficult. It is mineralized, broken, and crowded. It looks less like a polished instrument than a fossil of an instrument, and that comparison is useful. Like a fossil, it preserves form through transformation. Like a fossil, it must be interpreted from what remains, not from what anyone wishes had survived. Other fragments hold different kinds of evidence. Fragment B, associated with parts of the rear dial system, helps reveal the spiral scales that once tracked longer cycles. Smaller fragments preserve inscriptions, pieces of plates, bits of dial, and traces of edges that once belonged to a case. Individually, some pieces seem almost trivial. Together, they form a shattered archive. A few letters can confirm a calendar term. A gear tooth can help determine a ratio. A curved groove can suggest the path of a pointer. The mystery is not solved by one grand discovery, but by hundreds of small recognitions assembled over decades. The machine was probably housed in a wooden box, and that detail changes the way it should be imagined. It was not merely a naked set of gears. It had a front and a back. It likely had doors or covers bearing explanatory inscriptions. It had dials that presented information to the user while concealing most of the machinery inside. In modern terms, it had something like an interface. The user did not need to watch every gear mesh in order to read the result. The mechanism translated hidden motion into visible information. That is a surprisingly sophisticated concept. Complexity inside, clarity outside. What survives in the record suggests an object meant to be operated, not just admired. The bronze gears themselves are among the most striking remains. Their teeth are triangular, hand-cut, and arranged to transmit motion through carefully chosen numerical relationships. The exact number of teeth on many gears has been counted or reconstructed, and those counts matter because they encode astronomical cycles. A gear with a certain number of teeth is not arbitrary. It is part of a mathematical sentence written in metal. If one wheel drives another, and that wheel drives another. The ratio between them can represent the relation between a year and a lunar month, or between one eclipse cycle and another. In the Antikythera mechanism, bronze is doing arithmetic. Yet bronze is also what makes the problem so difficult. Corrosion can add shapes that were never part of the original design, and erase shapes that were essential. A broken gear may leave only part of its circumference, forcing scholars to estimate how many teeth it originally had. If a wheel is missing entirely, its former existence may be inferred from an empty bearing hole, a gear that needs a partner, or a dial that requires a drive. These inferences can be strong, but they are still inferences. Scholars still debate some details because the evidence remains incomplete. The mechanism offers a pattern, but not every line of the pattern survives. One lesser-known detail is that the machine seems to have undergone change or repair. Certain features suggest that it was not simply made, used once, and lost. Like many real devices, it may have had a working life. Parts could have been adjusted. The case may have worn. Pins, pointers, and fittings may have been replaced. If so, the mechanism becomes more human, less like a perfect artifact frozen at the moment of manufacture, and more like an instrument handled by people. Someone may have opened it. Someone may have corrected it. Someone may have known the small frustrations of keeping a delicate device working in a world without standardized replacement parts. The inscriptions deepen that human presence. They are not decoration in the ordinary sense. They are functional writing, etched into bronze with extraordinary smallness. Some letters are only a few millimeters high, and many survive poorly. Still, they reveal that the mechanism carried labels and explanatory text. These inscriptions name cycles, months, celestial events, and display instructions. They suggest that the device was meant to be read as well as turned. It was not a black box in the ancient world. It taught its user how to understand what it showed. That combination of gearwork and text makes the Antikythera mechanism especially rare. Many ancient objects are either written sources or physical tools. This one is both. It contains a technical system and its own partial guide. It is like finding a damaged instrument with fragments of the manual engraved on the instrument itself. But the manual is broken, and the instrument is broken, and each must be used to interpret the other. A word may suggest a dial function. A gear ratio may explain a word. The process is circular, careful, and often uncertain. The front of the mechanism remains particularly tantalizing because it is less completely preserved than the rear. Many reconstructions suggest that the front displayed the positions of the sun and moon against the zodiac and calendar scales, and perhaps showed lunar phase through a small rotating sphere or indicator. Some models have proposed planetary displays as well, though this remains more debated. The ancient Greeks had mathematical models for planetary motion, and later inscriptions may hint at planetary references, but the surviving gearwork for a full planetary system is not secure in the same way as some lunar and eclipse functions. No single explanation fully accounts for every fragment and inscription, so the front remains one of the great contested spaces of the machine. The rear, by contrast, has yielded more definite revelations. There were spiral dials, not simple circles, with pointers that move through long calendrical and eclipse cycles. Spiral dials are a clever solution to a practical problem. If a cycle contains many months, a simple circular scale becomes crowded. A spiral lets the scale wind inward or outward, giving more room for inscriptions and divisions. This is not only mathematics, it is design. The maker is thinking about the user's eye. The available surface, the density of information, even in fragments, one can sense a mind solving problems of space and clarity. The mechanism's original appearance must have been far more elegant than the corroded remains suggest. Imagine a wooden case, perhaps about the size of a thick book or small box, with bronze plates set into it. A knob or handle turns, pointers move, the moon changes phase, a dial advances through months. Small inscriptions help the user locate eclipses, years, or games. The object may have been portable, but not casual. It would have required craftsmanship, education, and probably money. It was the kind of thing that could sit at the intersection of scholarship and luxury, where intellectual prestige becomes a physical possession. And yet, for all that imagined elegance, the surviving fragments keep resisting certainty. This resistance is important. The Antikythera mechanism is often presented as if it has been completely decoded, but that is only partly true. Many major functions are well established. Others are probable. Some remain disputed. The machine has moved from mystery toward understanding, but not from mystery into total clarity. Its damaged condition forces modern researchers to live with degrees of confidence, and that is not weakness. It is how responsible history works. The bronze, the teeth, and the silence all belong together. The bronze tells us there was a real object, not merely a text claiming wonders. The teeth tell us there was mathematical machinery, not symbolic decoration. The silence tells us how much has vanished: the maker's name, the workshop, the owner, the route by which it reached the ship, the number of similar devices that may once have existed, the conversations held around it when it still moved smoothly. The fragments speak, but they speak through damage. So the machine stands in an unusual place. It is physical enough to prove that ancient geared astronomical calculation existed, yet broken enough to keep the proof from becoming simple. It is not a legend. It is not a fantasy. It is an object in pieces, and the pieces are stubborn. They force the modern world to look closely, to measure, to scan, to compare, to argue. They also force a larger question. If this battered bronze box could emerge from one wreck, what kind of world was capable of making it before the sea took it away? The world that could make the Antikythera mechanism is not a primitive stage waiting for intelligence to arrive later. It is a world of crowded harbours, royal courts, libraries, workshops, lecture rooms, observatories, sanctuaries, and shipyards, all connected by the restless movement of the Hellenistic Mediterranean. By the time the mechanism is made, Greek-speaking scholars have inherited centuries of mathematics and astronomy, but they are no longer working only inside the older city-states of the classical age. The Empire of Alexander has fractured into kingdoms, and those kingdoms compete not only with armies, but with knowledge. Rulers collect books, sponsor thinkers, build monuments, and use learning as a form of power. A machine that turns the heavens into bronze belongs naturally to that atmosphere, even if its exact birthplace remains uncertain. In Alexandria, Pergamon, Rhodes, Syracuse, and other centres, scholarship is no longer simply private reflection. It can be institutional, patronised, and ambitious. Libraries gather texts from across the known world. Mathematicians refine geometry. Astronomers compare observations from Egypt, Babylonia, and Greece. Engineers build war machines, pumps, automata, and devices meant to astonish. The line between practical craft and theoretical science is not as sharp as modern categories sometimes imply. A scholar may write about celestial models, while an artisan understands metals, tools, and motion. Somewhere between them, or perhaps in the mind of someone trained in both traditions, the possibility of a geared astronomical machine becomes thinkable. The older roots go deep. Greek astronomy has long been concerned with cycles: the year, the month, the phases of the moon, the wandering paths of the planets, the return of eclipses. Babylonian observers had preserved long records of celestial phenomena, and Greek astronomers learned from that tradition. Egyptian calendars offered another kind of timekeeping stability. Hellenistic science is powerful partly because it is absorbent. It does not arise in isolation. It translates, adapts, debates, and systematizes knowledge from several older worlds. What survives in the record suggests that the mechanism's cycles are part of this larger inheritance, compressed into a portable form. The mathematics behind such a machine is not casual. To model the sky mechanically, one must choose which cycles matter and how to express them as ratios. The moon does not simply circle the Earth in a way that looks uniform from night to night. Its motion varies. Months do not fit neatly into solar years. Eclipse seasons return according to patterns that are long enough to be impressive and short enough to be useful. Ancient astronomers knew these complications, not with modern physics, but with observational and geometrical sophistication. They did not need telescopes to notice regularities. They needed patience, records, calculation, and a willingness to imagine the sky as orderly even when its order was difficult. A lesser-known detail is how much of ancient astronomy is based on approximation rather than exact prediction in the modern sense. The Antikythera mechanism is astonishing, but it is not a perfect machine of the universe. It embodies selected cycles, using gear ratios that approximate celestial periods with remarkable ingenuity. That is one of its most human qualities. It is a compromise between the sky as observed, the mathematics available, the physical space inside the box, and the limits of handmade bronze. No single explanation fully accounts for every design choice, but the overall ambition is clear to make time and celestial pattern visible through controlled motion. The Hellenistic world also has the mechanical imagination required for such work. Ancient writers describe devices powered by water, air, falling weights, and hidden mechanisms. Some are practical, others are theatrical or religious. Temple doors open mysteriously. Figures pour libations. Birds sing through pneumatic tricks. Siege engines hurl stones with terrifying force. Water clocks regulate time. Odometers, at least in textual tradition, count distance through gearing. These inventions do not mean that the ancient world was on the edge of industrialization. That would be too simple. They do show that mechanical thinking existed, and that skilled artisans could translate abstract motion into physical devices. The Antikythera mechanism sits at the rare meeting point of two traditions that often leave different traces. Astronomy leaves texts, craft leaves objects. Texts survive if copied. Objects survive if not melted, broken, burned, or drowned. Bronze especially is vulnerable to usefulness. A broken bronze mechanism can become raw material. Its metal can be recast into tools, weapons, coins, fittings, or statues. The fact that this machine survived at all may depend on the shipwreck removing it suddenly from circulation. The sea damaged it, but the sea also saved it from the furnace. To understand the device, it helps to imagine the kind of workshop that might have made it. Not a modern factory, and not a lone genius hammering in isolation, but a specialized environment where metal workers, mathematicians, scribes, and patrons overlap. The maker needs bronze sheet, gear blanks, cutting tools, compasses, files, drills, and measuring skill. He needs astronomical knowledge or access to someone who has it. He needs a reason to spend enormous effort on an object whose value is intellectual as much as practical. He may be working for a wealthy individual, a school, a royal court, or a learned circle. Scholars still debate the social setting, but the machine does not look like a casual experiment. It looks like the result of an established capacity. The intellectual confidence behind it is striking. To build such a device is to believe that the heavens can be represented, not worshipped only, not feared only, not poetically described only, but modelled. This does not mean ancient people had abandoned religion or wonder. The same society could sacrifice to gods, consult omens, study geometry, and calculate eclipses. Ancient thought is not divided into modern compartments. An eclipse could be a celestial event with a calculable cycle and still carry cultural weight. A machine could predict it without emptying it of meaning. The Antikythera mechanism therefore belongs to a world where science, philosophy, religion, and prestige coexist in complicated ways. A wealthy owner might use it to demonstrate learning. A teacher might use it to explain celestial order. A scholar might use it to compare calendars and cycles. A patron might enjoy it as a marvel. The device may have had more than one purpose, because sophisticated objects often do. Its value did not have to be purely practical. It could be practical, educational, symbolic, and beautiful at once. This is where the Hellenistic setting becomes essential. After Alexander, Greek culture spreads widely, but it also changes. It encounters older scholarly traditions in Egypt and Mesopotamia. Royal courts compete for intellectual brilliance. Cities become nodes of exchange. Rhodes, for example, is famous for astronomy, navigation, education, and maritime power. Alexandria is famous for its library and mathematical scholarship. Syracuse, earlier, is linked with Archimedes and mechanical ingenuity. These places are not interchangeable, but together they show that the mechanism did not emerge from an empty background. It emerged from a network where such an object, though exceptional, is historically possible. And yet possibility is not the same as explanation. If the world could make this machine, why do we not find many more? If workshops knew these techniques, why is the archaeological record so thin? If texts described comparable devices, why have so few survived? The evidence remains incomplete, and the incompleteness leaves a shadow over every confident statement. Perhaps these machines were extremely rare, made only for elite patrons. Perhaps they were more common than we know. But almost all were recycled. Perhaps the tradition was transmitted in specialized circles and later broken by war, economic change, or shifting priorities. The mechanism answers one question and raises several others. What it proves, above all, is that ancient knowledge could become material in a way that modern assumptions long underestimated. The Hellenistic scholar does not live only in scrolls. The artisan does not work only in brute utility. Between them is a space where theory becomes an object that can be held, turned, and read. The Antikythera mechanism is born from that space. It is bronze mathematics, portable astronomy, and a fragment of a world where the sky could be placed inside a box without losing its grandeur. The wreck near Antikythera hides the machine for 2 millennia, but the roots of the device reach outward into libraries, courts, workshops, and observatories. The machine is strange because it survived alone, not because it was born in a world incapable of imagining it. Its gears are surprising, but they are not rootless. Behind them stands the Hellenistic Mediterranean, restless and brilliant, a place where rulers wanted glory, scholars wanted order, artisans knew the discipline of materials, and the heavens offered the largest pattern anyone could hope to understand. To place the sky inside a machine, the maker first has to decide what kind of sky the machine will show. The heavens are too large, too layered, and too full of irregularities to be copied completely in bronze. Every model is a choice. The Antikythera mechanism seems to choose the sky as a system of cycles, the rising and setting of years, the shifting of months, the changing face of the moon, the return of eclipses, the order of calendars, and perhaps the positions of celestial bodies against the zodiac. It does not capture the universe as modern astronomy describes it. It captures the ancient sky as a pattern that can be followed, taught, and predicted. The user likely operates the device by turning a handle or knob, setting the machine into motion through a train of gears. One movement travels through the interior, and the hidden wheels translate that movement into several visible displays. This is the essential magic of the mechanism, though magic is not the right word. The wonder is mechanical. A single input produces coordinated outputs. As one dial advances through a year, another tracks lunar months. A pointer moves through an eclipse cycle. A display may show the moon's phase. The machine becomes a compressed cosmos, not because it contains the sky, but because it contains the mathematical relationships by which the sky can be anticipated. The front face is usually imagined as the place where the visible heavens were brought closest to the viewer. Around it may have been a zodiac scale, dividing the path of the sun into the familiar signs inherited through Greek astronomy, and a calendar scale, marking the passage of days and months. A pointer for the sun probably moved around this display, showing its position through the year. A lunar pointer likely moved as well, not merely circling at a simple rate, but incorporating a more subtle representation of the moon's uneven motion. The evidence for the broad solar and lunar display is strong, though details of the front remain debated because so much has been lost. The moon is one of the mechanism's most beautiful problems. To the naked eye, it seems familiar. A bright companion changing shape night after night, but its motion is not perfectly uniform. It speeds and slows in ways ancient astronomers studied carefully. The Antikythera mechanism appears to have included a remarkable device involving a pin and slot arrangement to model this anomaly, connected to the cycle associated with Hipparchus's lunar theory. In simple terms, the maker did not treat the moon as a crude lamp circling at a constant pace. He tried to capture a known irregularity. That detail alone lifts the mechanism beyond a decorative calendar. It suggests a machine shaped by serious astronomical theory. There may also have been a lunar phase display, perhaps using a small rotating sphere or black and white indicator to show the waxing and waning moon. If so, the user could see not only where the moon was in the zodiac, but how it appeared in the sky. This is a modest feature compared with the gear trains behind it, but it would have been powerful for anyone using the device as a teaching instrument. The moon's changing face is one of the most immediate astronomical experiences humans share. To reproduce it in miniature is to turn observation into demonstration. The rear of the mechanism carries longer rhythms. One spiral dial appears to represent the Metonic cycle, a 19-year period in which 235 lunar months fit closely with 19 solar years. This relationship was important because lunar months and solar years do not naturally align. Calendars based on the moon drift unless corrected. A Metonic cycle allows a society to coordinate months, years, festivals, and seasonal expectations with greater order. The mechanism's rear dial could track that long reconciliation between lunar and solar time. It is not just astronomical, it is civic and religious, because calendars govern when communities gather, worship, compete, plant, sail, and remember. Another related cycle, the Callipic cycle, may have been represented as a smaller subsidiary dial. The Callipic cycle refines the Metonic cycle by grouping 4 Metonic cycles into a 76-year period, adjusting the relationship between solar and lunar time more carefully. That may sound abstract, but it reveals the scale of thought embedded in the machine. It is not only tracking tomorrow's moon, it is organizing decades. In a world where human life is short and political fortunes change violently, the machine quietly holds a cycle longer than many lives. A separate rear dial appears connected with the Saros cycle, roughly 18 years, 11 days, and a fraction, after which eclipses repeat in a recognizable pattern. This feature deserves its own deeper attention later, because it is one of the most astonishing parts of the device. For now, what matters is that the mechanism does not merely show ordinary calendar time. It points toward rare and dramatic events, the darkening of the sun or the reddening of the moon, events that could frighten armies, disturb rulers, and inspire interpretation. To predict an eclipse is not to remove its emotional power entirely, but it changes the relationship between fear and knowledge. There was also likely an exoligmos dial, a refinement of the Saros that accounts for the fraction of a day in the eclipse cycle. After one Saros, an eclipse pattern returns, but the time of day shifts, meaning the eclipse may be visible in a different region. After 3 Saros cycles, the timing comes closer to repeating at a similar hour. A small dial for this correction shows the machine's attention to practical astronomical subtlety. It is a reminder that ancient prediction is not merely a matter of finding a cycle and stopping there. The maker is dealing with mismatches, residues, and corrections, the stubborn leftovers that make the sky more complicated than a simple wheel. One of the most surprising features is the inclusion of a games dial, apparently marking the cycle of major athletic festivals, including the Olympiad and other Pan-Hellenic games. This seems at first almost out of place beside eclipses and lunar theory. But in the ancient Greek world it makes sense. Time is social as well as celestial. Games are anchored in calendars, identity, and prestige. The same machine that follows the moon can also situate human celebration within larger cycles. This detail prevents the mechanism from becoming too abstract in the imagination. It is not only about remote stars, it is about people knowing when to travel, compete, gather, and measure their lives against recurring events. The machine therefore joins several kinds of time: astronomical time, calendar time, ritual time, civic time, and perhaps intellectual time. Its genius lies not only in the presence of gears, but in the selection and coordination of these rhythms. A modern observer might expect an ancient astronomical device to focus only on celestial positions, but the Antikythera mechanism seems broader than that. It is a world organizer. It lets the user see how cycles nest inside other cycles, how the month relates to the year, how eclipses return, how festivals recur, how the orderly sky can be made legible on a human scale. Yet the machine is not a transparent window into ancient certainty. Scholars still debate the full design of the front display, especially the extent to which planetary motions were included. Some reconstructions have proposed a display for the 5 known planets, which would make the device even more elaborate. The inscriptions include references that may relate to planetary phenomena, and Greek astronomy certainly possessed planetary models. But the surviving physical evidence for a complete planetary gear system is incomplete. This is one of the places where popular accounts sometimes run faster than the evidence. It is possible that the front was more complex than the surviving gears prove, but responsible reconstruction must keep probability separate from desire. Even without a secure full planetary display, the mechanism is extraordinary. It transforms abstract cycles into embodied motion. It shows that ancient astronomy was not only observed, recorded, and calculated on writing surfaces, but also engineered. The user could turn time forward or backward, moving through months and years with the hand. That ability has a quiet philosophical force. A person operating the device is no longer merely waiting for the sky to unfold. He's exploring celestial order in miniature, accelerating it, reversing it, pausing it, reading it. The heavens remain vast, but their pattern becomes something the hand can investigate. The machine's model of the sky is geocentric, as ancient astronomy generally was. Earth stands at the center of the conceptual system, and celestial bodies move around it through cycles. Modern astronomy has replaced that framework, but it would be a mistake to dismiss the mechanism because its cosmos is not ours. Prediction and physical truth are not always the same in historical science. Ancient geocentric models could produce useful accounts of apparent motion. The Antikythera mechanism is not valuable because it anticipated modern cosmology. It is valuable because it shows how powerfully ancient thinkers could model the sky they saw. The evidence remains incomplete, but the surviving structure suggests a device of remarkable ambition, one that gathers solar years, lunar months, eclipse cycles, calendar names, festival cycles, and possibly more into one compact system. It is a machine of correspondences. Every wheel answers another wheel. Every dial compresses observation into scale. The user turns bronze, and the sky responds. Or rather, the sky has already responded, centuries earlier. In the minds of observers and mathematicians who noticed its patterns, the machine is their thought made durable enough to survive, though barely, the wreck of a ship and the patience of the sea. The machine has gears, inscriptions, cycles, and a wreck, but it does not have a signature. No maker steps forward from the bronze. No workshop mark survives clearly enough to settle the matter. No ancient writer says, in words that can be securely tied to this object, that a certain person built this exact device and sent it across the sea. For an artifact so intellectually forceful, the absence is almost startling. The Antikythera mechanism is one of the most sophisticated objects ever recovered from the ancient world, yet its creator remains a shadow shaped by evidence rather than a name. That missing name matters because ancient science is often remembered through individuals: Euclid, Archimedes, Hipparchus, Eratosthenes, Apollonius, Ptolemy. The names become anchors in a vast and incomplete record. They allow later generations to turn abstract developments into biographies, even when the biographies themselves are thin. The mechanism resists that comfort. It may draw on theories associated with famous astronomers, especially in its treatment of lunar motion. But using a theory is not the same as identifying the builder. A device can embody Hipparchus's astronomy without having been made by Hipparchus. It can resemble the kind of mechanical ingenuity linked with Archimedes without being the work of Archimedes. The evidence remains incomplete, and the machine will not simplify itself into a single heroic inventor. The temptation to attach it to Archimedes is understandable. He is the great mechanical genius of ancient imagination, the man later tradition surrounds with siege engines, mathematical brilliance, and devices of almost theatrical ingenuity. He lived in Syracuse in the 3rd century BCE, earlier than the likely date of the Antikythera mechanism, and ancient sources describe planetarium-like devices associated with him or his tradition. Cicero, writing in the 1st century BCE, mentions mechanical spheres that showed the motions of celestial bodies, including one said to have been made by Archimedes and brought to Rome after the capture of Syracuse. That passage is tantalizing because it proves that elite Romans knew stories of Greek celestial machines, but it does not prove that Archimedes made the Antikythera mechanism, and the dating, style, and specific features of the surviving device do not allow such a direct claim. Scholars still debate the relationship between textual references to celestial spheres and the geared bronze from Antikythera. Hipparchus presents a different kind of possibility. He worked in the 2nd century BCE and is strongly associated with Rhodes, one of the leading centers of astronomy in the Hellenistic world. His lunar theory appears relevant to the mechanism's attempt to model the moon's varying motion. The device's pin and slot arrangement has often been understood as a mechanical expression of ideas connected to Hipparchan astronomy. That makes Hipparchus intellectually close to the machine, perhaps closer than any other known figure. Yet closeness is not authorship. A workshop could use his results. A student could adapt them. A later maker could inherit them. The machine may owe something to his astronomy without owing its physical existence to his hands. There is also the philosopher Posidonius, active on Rhodes in the 1st century BCE, whose school attracted Roman elites and whose interests ranged widely across natural philosophy, geography, astronomy, and history. Cicero studied with him, and later references suggest that Posidonius may have possessed or made a kind of celestial device. Again, the connection is intriguing but slippery. Rhodes had the right intellectual atmosphere. Posidonius had the right reputation. Roman collectors and travellers moved through his world, but the surviving mechanism does not carry his name. What survives in the record suggests possibility, not proof. The missing inventor problem also reveals something about ancient labour. Modern audiences often want a lone genius because lone genius makes a clean story. But a mechanism like this may not have been the work of one person in the simple sense. One mind may have designed the astronomical scheme. Another may have cut gears. Another may have engraved inscriptions. Another may have built the wooden case. A patron may have commissioned it. A teacher may have specified its functions. A workshop tradition may have supplied methods inherited over generations. The finished object could represent collaboration, even if one master oversaw it. In that case, the absence of a single name is not merely an accident. It reflects the way knowledge and craft often move through communities. This is a lesser-known but important point. The ancient record is biased toward writers, patrons, generals, and philosophers, not necessarily toward artisans. The person who cut the teeth of the gears may have been extraordinarily skilled, but his name was less likely to be preserved than that of the scholar whose theory he implemented, or the aristocrat who owned the machine. Technical labour often disappears behind intellectual prestige, the Antikythera mechanism, with its precise bronze parts, reminds us that lost history is not only lost ideas, it is lost hands. The inscriptions may offer clues to origin, though not to a maker's identity. Letter forms can be dated within broad ranges. Dial month names may point toward particular regional calendars. The language and terminology reflect Greek technical culture. These details narrow the field, but they do not solve it. Ancient Greek calendars varied from place to place, and names could travel with people, texts, or intended users. A calendar associated with one region does not necessarily prove that the machine was made there. It may indicate where it was meant to be used, who commissioned it, or which tradition the maker followed. No single explanation fully accounts for all the clues. Even the date of manufacture is a careful estimate rather than a stamped fact. The wreck itself is usually placed in the 1st century BCE, with coins and cargo helping establish a broad context. The mechanism could be older than the wreck. It may have been made decades before it sank. Its inscriptions and astronomical cycles suggest a Hellenistic setting, but the exact year is unknown. That uncertainty makes authorship even harder. A difference of a few decades can shift the list of plausible makers and centres. In archaeology, time is often a range, and ranges leave room for debate. There is a deeper reason the lack of an inventor feels so unsettling. The machine appears personal because it is so intricate. Someone made choices everywhere. Someone chose the cycles. Someone decided how to arrange the dials. Someone selected gear ratios, solved spacing problems, engraved explanatory text, and designed a user's experience. The object is full of decisions, yet the decision maker is absent. The result is a strange intimacy without biography. We can follow the movement of the maker's mind through metal, but we cannot call him by name. This absence protects the machine from becoming too small a story. If it were securely labelled as the work of one famous figure, the temptation would be to fold it neatly into that person's legend. Instead, it points outward. It asks what kind of educational networks, workshops, patrons, and technical traditions could produce such a thing. It asks how widely astronomical gearing was understood. It asks whether similar devices were known in Rhodes, Alexandria, Syracuse, or elsewhere. It asks why texts remember some celestial machines, but archaeology preserves almost none. The missing inventor becomes not a dead end, but a doorway into a broader lost landscape. Popular imagination often fills that doorway with unsupported claims. Some present the mechanism as so advanced that it must have come from a forgotten super-civilization or some outside source. But the real evidence does not require that. The machine's sophistication is extraordinary, yet its parts belong to known ancient capabilities: bronze working, mathematical astronomy, gear cutting, inscription, and calendrical calculation. The mystery is not that ancient people could not have made it. The mystery is why so little else of this mechanical tradition survives, and why the chain from theory to object is so difficult to reconstruct. So the maker remains unnamed, but not unimaginable. He belongs to a Greek-speaking technical world shaped by astronomy, craft, and patronage. He may have worked in a city where scholars debated lunar cycles and artisans made delicate instruments. He likely had access to astronomical knowledge more advanced than everyday calendar reckoning. He probably knew, or worked with someone who knew, how to transform periods of years and months into mechanical ratios. He had the patience to cut and assemble small bronze gears, and the confidence to trust that the sky's order could survive translation into a box. In the end, the missing inventor is one of the machine's quietest and most powerful mysteries. The Antikythera mechanism is not anonymous because it lacks intelligence. It is anonymous despite being saturated with intelligence. Its maker vanishes behind the very success of his work. The gears remain, the name does not. And perhaps that is fitting for an object built to show cycles larger than any human life. The hand that made it is gone. The pattern it tried to capture continues. The moon still waxes and wanes. Eclipses still return. The sea still moves around Antikythera, and inside the broken bronze, a nameless mind still turns. If the maker cannot be named, the next question becomes a map. Where could such a machine have been born? The wreck gives only the place where the device was lost, not the place where it was designed, built, used, or packed for transport. Antikythera is a point of disappearance, and disappearance is not origin. To move backward from the seabed into the living world of the mechanism, scholars have to follow clues that are subtle, damaged, and sometimes contradictory. The style of the inscriptions, the calendars on the dials, the astronomy embodied in the gears, the cargo around it, and the intellectual geography of the late Hellenistic Mediterranean. Rhodes often stands near the centre of the discussion, and for good reason. In the 2nd and 1st centuries BCE, Rhodes is a major maritime power, a place of navigation, education, astronomy, and wealth. It sits along busy sea routes and maintains connections across the eastern Mediterranean. It is associated with Hipparchus, whose lunar theory seems relevant to the mechanism's modelling of the moon's uneven motion. It is also associated with Posidonius, whose school later attracts Roman elites. If one were looking for a city where mathematical astronomy, skilled craft, wealthy patrons, and sea travel overlapped, Rhodes would be hard to ignore. The Rhodian possibility becomes even more attractive because of the ship's likely movement through the eastern Mediterranean toward the west. A valuable scientific instrument made or kept on Rhodes could plausibly end up aboard a vessel carrying Greek luxury goods toward a Roman destination. That does not prove the case, but it gives the theory a natural shape. The mechanism feels at home in a Rhodian setting, a learned island, a maritime culture, a place where the sky mattered for both philosophy and navigation. What survives in the record suggests that Rhodes had the intellectual atmosphere in which such a device could be understood and valued. Yet Rhodes is not the only candidate. Syracuse, in Sicily, cast a long shadow because of Archimedes. Earlier than the mechanism's likely date, Syracuse had been home to one of antiquity's most brilliant mathematicians and engineers. Later Roman accounts of Archimedes' celestial spheres keep Syracuse in the conversation, even if indirectly. If a tradition of mechanical planetaria or astronomical devices grew from Archimedean work, then the Antikythera mechanism might be related to that broader lineage. But the argument is difficult. A tradition can influence later makers without making Syracuse the actual workshop. The evidence remains incomplete, and the distance between textual memory and surviving bronze cannot be crossed by admiration alone. Alexandria is another tempting possibility. Few cities in the Hellenistic world are more closely associated with scholarship. Its library, museum, mathematicians, astronomers, and engineers represent one of the great intellectual concentrations of the ancient Mediterranean. The city is deeply connected to Egyptian calendrical traditions and to the broader exchange of knowledge from the Near East. If one imagines an environment capable of producing a sophisticated astronomical calculator, Alexandria must be considered. It had books, observers, mathematicians, royal patronage, and technical expertise. But again, possibility is not proof. The mechanism's surviving calendar details and inscriptions do not simply point to Alexandria in a way that ends the debate. Pergamon, too, belongs in the wider landscape, though it is less often placed at the centre of popular discussions. Like Alexandria, it is a royal capital with a famous library and a culture of elite learning. Hellenistic kingdoms compete through scholarship as well as monuments and armies. Instruments, texts, and specialists can move between courts. A device like the Antikythera mechanism could have been commissioned in one place, designed by someone trained in another, and shipped through a third. The ancient Mediterranean does not respect the tidy boundaries that modern reconstructions sometimes prefer. The calendar evidence is especially intriguing. Some month names on the mechanism have been linked to calendars used in northwestern Greece, including regions such as Epirus or Corinthian colonies. This has led some scholars to suggest that the mechanism may have been intended for a user from that cultural orbit, or that it drew from a calendar tradition connected to those areas. But calendars are slippery clues. A machine could be made in Rhodes for a client from Epirus. It could incorporate a calendar familiar to its intended owner. It could follow a tradition transmitted through texts. It could be adapted. No single explanation fully accounts for the relationship between the calendar names, the astronomy, and the wreck cargo. This is one of the quiet complexities of ancient artifacts. Objects often have several homes. There is the place of manufacture, the place of intellectual origin, the place of use, the place of ownership, the place of transport, and the place of loss. The Antikythera mechanism may not allow all those places to collapse into one. Its astronomy may point toward Rhodes. Its calendar may suggest another regional connection. Its shipwreck belongs to a route through the Aegean. Its cargo suggests Roman collecting. Its intellectual ancestry reaches Babylonian observations, Greek geometry, and Hellenistic mechanical craft. To ask where it comes from is really to ask which layer of its life one wants to isolate. The strongest theories, therefore, do not imagine a single isolated workshop appearing out of nowhere. They imagine networks. A Rhodian astronomer could use Babylonian cycles and Greek mathematical models. A craftsman trained in delicate bronze work could build an instrument for a patron whose calendar came from elsewhere. A Roman collector could acquire the finished object as part of a shipment of prestigious Greek goods. The device may be local in some details and cosmopolitan in its knowledge. That combination is not unusual for the Hellenistic world. It is one of its defining features. There is also the matter of language and inscription style. The Greek letters engraved on the mechanism can be studied for their forms, which help place the object broadly within the Hellenistic period. But paleography is rarely as precise as a modern date stamp. Letter forms change over time, but not instantly or uniformly. Regional habits overlap. Engravers copy styles. A scientific instrument may preserve conservative terminology. Scholars still debate how much weight to give these details, especially when many inscriptions are damaged and fragmentary. The shipwreck cargo adds another layer, but it too resists a single answer. Some objects may have come from different places and different times before being loaded together. A Roman patron might gather artworks from Greek sanctuaries, markets, workshops, and collections. A ship's cargo is not necessarily a snapshot of one city. It can be an accumulation. The mechanism may have joined the cargo late in its journey. It may have been packed among other precious items, not because all were made in the same place, but because all were being moved toward the same destination. What this means is that the origin problem is not a failure of scholarship. It is a faithful reflection of the ancient world's complexity. The Antikythera mechanism is not a village tool whose materials and style point neatly to one district. It is an elite technical object made in a connected world. Its origin may be distributed across people and places, observations inherited from Babylon, mathematical astronomy shaped in Greek centres, gearwork produced in a specialized workshop, calendars chosen for a specific user, and final transport tied to Roman demand. The machine is portable, and portable things gather histories. Still, Rhodes remains the most evocative candidate because it gathers so many threads. A learned island famous for astronomy, a maritime crossroads, a plausible connection to Hipparchus, a later connection to Posidonius, and a position within the networks that could send such an object toward Roman hands. The case is not airtight, and it should not be presented as settled, but it has a coherence that makes it difficult to dismiss. If the mechanism did not come from Rhodes, it may still come from a world very much like Rhodes' Greek-speaking, mathematically literate, mechanically skilled, wealthy enough to support specialized work, and connected enough for the finished object to travel far from its maker. The debate over origin changes the way the machine is seen. It stops being a single impossible artifact and becomes the surviving trace of a mobile intellectual culture, whether born in Rhodes, Syracuse, Alexandria, Pergamon, or some less famous workshop whose name history has misplaced. The mechanism belongs to a Mediterranean where knowledge moves by ship as surely as marble and wine. That movement is what brings it, eventually, into danger. A machine made to follow celestial cycles enters the human cycle of ownership, transport, and loss. Its birthplace remains uncertain, but its world becomes clearer. A world of scholars watching the sky, artisans cutting bronze, patrons collecting wonders, and ships carrying the fragile products of intelligence across a sea that does not promise safe arrival. The Antikythera mechanism does not only contain gears, it contains words, and those words may be the closest thing the machine has to a surviving voice. They are not grand public inscriptions meant to boast of kings or victories. They are small, compressed, technical, and practical, cut into bronze in letters so tiny that they seem almost private. Some sit on plates, some curve around dials, some survive only as fragments, half erased by corrosion and fracture. Yet together they suggest that the machine was not meant to be a mute marvel. It was meant to be read, interpreted, and used. This is one of the most important shifts in understanding the device. A machine without inscriptions might still be impressive, but it would be far more opaque. The words turn the Antikythera mechanism into something closer to an ancient instrument with built-in instructions. The user did not simply turn a handle and watch pointers move. He read labels, followed scales, recognized month names, and consulted explanatory text. The mechanism therefore had an interface in both metal and language. Its gears performed calculations hidden inside the case, while its inscriptions translated those calculations into human meaning. The survival of those inscriptions is uneven and frustrating. The sea damaged them badly. Bronze corrosion obscured letters, breakage scattered lines across fragments. Some characters are clear, some uncertain, and some gone completely. Modern imaging has recovered far more than early scholars could see with the naked eye. But even now the text is not complete. The evidence remains incomplete, and every restored word must be handled with care. A missing letter can affect a reading. A broken line can change an interpretation. The mechanism speaks, but it speaks through static. The back cover inscriptions appear to have described the dials and cycles, almost like a guide to the machine's functions. They refer to astronomical and calendrical features, explaining what certain displays mean and how they relate to events in the sky. This is not decorative poetry. It is technical prose carved into an object. That alone is remarkable. Ancient technical manuals mostly survive as copied texts, if they survive at all. Here, part of the manual is physically attached to the machine. It is as though the maker knew that the device's complexity required explanation, and chose to engrave that explanation directly onto the case. On the dials themselves, inscriptions identify months, cycles, and events. The Metonic dial includes month names arranged across the long 19-year lunar-solar cycle. The Saros dial includes eclipse-related markings, some with glyph-like indicators that help identify predicted eclipses. These marks are not random. They help the user locate moments when eclipses may occur, and in some cases they may encode information such as whether the eclipse is solar or lunar, and perhaps the expected time. The mechanism is not merely pointing to dates, it is annotating them. This detail makes the machine feel unexpectedly modern in concept, though not in technology. It has data, display, labels, and user guidance. It transforms hidden calculation into readable output. Its maker understands that information is only useful if presented in a form the user can navigate. The spiral dials, the pointers, the divisions, the inscriptions, and the cover text all work together. This is not just engineering, it is design. The letters also help establish the cultural world of the machine. The language is Greek, technical, and connected to Hellenistic astronomical vocabulary. It reflects a literate user, someone capable of reading dense small text and understanding specialized terms. This was not a peasant's field calendar or a sailor's rough rule of thumb. It belonged to an educated environment. That does not mean only a professional astronomer could use it. But it does suggest that the owner or intended audience had training, status, or access to instruction. The machine may have been made to teach such knowledge, but even teaching instruments assume a certain kind of learner. One lesser-known aspect of the inscriptions is their physical difficulty. The lettering is extremely small, often around the scale of a few millimeters. Engraving such text cleanly on bronze requires careful tools and a steady hand. Reading it would also require good light and close attention. This was not signage for a crowd. It was meant for someone near the object, leaning in, perhaps turning it slowly, using the words as a companion to the moving dials. The scale of the text reinforces the intimacy of the device. The Antikythera mechanism was not shouting its knowledge across a hall. It was offering it at arm's length. The inscriptions also complicate the question of purpose. If the device were only a prestige object, why include so much technical guidance? If it were only a calculating tool for an expert, why engrave explanatory text at all? The presence of instructions suggests a broader role, perhaps demonstration, education, or use by someone learned but not necessarily expert in every astronomical cycle. No single explanation fully accounts for all the evidence. The mechanism may have been both the display of mastery and a working guide to celestial time. In ancient elite culture, those roles could easily overlap. Some inscriptions may have referenced planetary motions or phenomena, and this has fed debates about the front display. The known planets, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn were central to ancient astronomy, and a complete mechanical cosmos would naturally tempt any reconstructor to include them. But the evidence is not as secure as it is for the lunar, solar, calendrical, and eclipse functions. The text hints, but does not fully preserve the mechanism that would settle the matter. Scholars still debate how much planetary information the original front face displayed. This is one of the places where the machine's broken manual becomes both treasure and torment. The calendar inscriptions provide another kind of clue. Month names can point toward particular regional traditions, but not with absolute certainty. They may reflect the intended user's calendar rather than the place of manufacture. They may record a local system important to the owner, a patron, or a scholarly tradition. A machine can travel with the calendar of one region while being built in another. The inscriptions therefore help narrow possibilities, but they do not close the case. They remind us that ancient time was not universal. Different communities named and organized months differently, and the mechanism had to choose one system to display. The language of eclipse prediction is especially evocative because eclipses sit at the boundary between calculation and awe. The inscriptions reduce them to entries on a dial, yet the events themselves would have been overwhelming to witness. A solar eclipse drains daylight from the world. A lunar eclipse stains the moon. Ancient observers could record, predict, and interpret these phenomena with increasing sophistication. But prediction did not necessarily make them emotionally ordinary. The machine's tiny markings place those dramatic events into a controlled cycle. They do not make the sky less strange. They make its strangeness scheduled. There is something poignant in the idea of instruction surviving when the user does not The person for whom the labels were cut is gone. The hand that turned the device is gone. The voice that may have explained it to students or guests is gone. But the text remains, damaged and partial, telling modern scholars how the machine once wanted to be understood. It is not a full confession, but it is more than silence. The inscriptions are the mechanism's attempt to outlive misunderstanding. They also show that the machine belongs to a culture of explanation. It is not merely an object of hidden knowledge guarded by mystery. It explains itself as far as it can. That matters because it separates the real Antikythera mechanism from later fantasies projected onto it. The ancient maker did not hide impossible secrets in a magical box. He built a technical instrument and labelled it. The mystery comes from loss, not deliberate obscurity. What seems occult from a distance becomes, up close, a damaged educational technology from a literate scientific culture. Still, because the text is incomplete, it leaves room for longing. Every missing word feels like a door that almost opens. A complete inscription might identify a function beyond dispute. A maker's name might have been carved on a lost cover. A dedication might have explained the patron. A few more preserved lines could have settled the planetary question or clarified the machine's intended use. Instead, the surviving words give enough to guide, but not enough to end debate. The mechanism remains balanced between revelation and absence. And perhaps that is why the inscriptions are so powerful. The gears show that the ancient world could calculate with bronze. The words show that it could also teach through bronze. Together they reveal a machine that was not only built to move, but built to communicate. Its hidden instructions do not solve every mystery. They make the mystery sharper, more disciplined, and more human. Somewhere in the broken letters is the trace of an ancient user bending close to the case, reading the sky one line at a time. An eclipse is one of the sky's oldest interruptions. The sun weakens, the air changes, birds may fall silent, and daylight seems to lose confidence in itself. Or the full moon, normally bright and steady, begins to darken, taking on a dim copper colour that feels less like ordinary night than a warning. In the ancient world, such events could be watched with fear, reverence, calculation, or all three at once. They belonged to the heavens, but they entered human life directly. Armies noticed them. Rulers worried about them. Priests interpreted them. Astronomers recorded them. The Antikythera mechanism does something extraordinary with that ancient unease it places eclipses on a dial. The key is the Saros cycle, a period of about 18 years, 11 days, and 8 hours, after which similar eclipses recur. This cycle was known in ancient astronomy through long observation, especially in the Babylonian tradition, and later became part of the mathematical astronomy inherited and adapted by Greek scholars. The mechanism appears to use a spiral dial to track this cycle across 223 lunar months. That number is not decorative. It is the backbone of the prediction system. By marking positions within the Saros cycle, the machine can indicate months when solar or lunar eclipses may occur. This does not mean the mechanism predicted eclipses with modern precision. It did not calculate the exact path of totality across Earth in the way contemporary astronomy can. It did not know gravity as Newtonian theory would describe it, nor did it model the Earth-Moon-Sun system through modern celestial mechanics. Its eclipse predictions were cyclical and approximate, based on recognized patterns. But that is exactly what makes it historically powerful. The maker took a long astronomical period, encoded it mechanically, annotated it, and gave the user a way to explore future and past eclipse possibilities by turning a handle. Prediction became portable. The Saros dial was probably arranged as a spiral rather than a simple circle, because 223 months require space. A circular dial with so many divisions would be crowded and hard to read. A spiral allows the months to unfold across several turns, creating a longer scale within a compact area. This is one of the mechanism's elegant design solutions. It shows that the maker is not merely forcing data into bronze, he is arranging information so that a human user can follow it. The sky is vast. The box is small, and the spiral becomes a compromise between the two. On the Saros dial, small inscriptions or glyphs appear to indicate eclipse months. These marks may distinguish solar and lunar eclipses and provide additional information, possibly including the time of day or other characteristics. Some marks are damaged, and scholars still debate readings and interpretations. The evidence remains incomplete, but the overall function is clear enough to be remarkable. The mechanism does not only say that an eclipse belongs somewhere in a cycle, it gives the user a structured way to identify when that danger or wonder might return. There is also the exoligmos cycle, a longer period of 3 Saros cycles, roughly 54 years and 1 month. The extra 8 hours in a single Saros matters because Earth turns during those hours. After 1 Saros, a similar eclipse may occur, but not at the same local time or in the same region. After 3 Saros cycles, the accumulated extra time comes close to a full day, making the timing more comparable. The Antikythera mechanism seems to include a small dial for this correction, a subtle feature that reveals how carefully the maker handled the imperfection of cycles. The heavens repeat, but not neatly enough for a simple mindless loop. The machine acknowledges the leftover. This is one of the great lessons of the device. Ancient astronomy was not just about finding perfect circles and declaring victory. It was about noticing discrepancies and building systems to manage them. The Saros is powerful, but it has a remainder. The Metonic cycle is useful, but it is an approximation. Lunar motion can be modelled, but only with adjustments. The mechanism is full of these negotiated solutions. Its intelligence lies not in pretending the sky is simple, but in making complexity usable. The cultural effect of eclipse prediction is harder to measure. By the time of the Hellenistic world, educated astronomers could understand eclipses as natural events with recurring patterns. Yet public reaction to eclipses could still be intense. Knowledge does not erase emotion. A predicted eclipse can still be frightening when daylight fades. A ruler may still worry about omens. A community may still interpret the event through religious traditions. The mechanism sits at that intersection. It turns an event of awe into a scheduled phenomenon without making it ordinary. A tiny mark on a dial points toward a future moment when the sky itself will seem to fail. One lesser-known detail is that eclipse prediction also depends on whether an eclipse is visible from a particular location. The Saros can identify possible eclipses, but not all eclipses are seen everywhere. Some occur when the relevant body is below the horizon for the observer. Some are partial. Some are invisible in a given region. The mechanism's predictions, therefore, should not be imagined as a universal forecast service in the modern sense. They are more like a structured astronomical warning system, rooted in cycle knowledge. No single explanation fully accounts for how every user may have understood or applied the information, but the device clearly gave eclipses a place within calculable time. The rear dials also reveal a kind of mental architecture. The Metonic dial reconciles months and years. The Saros dial anticipates eclipses. The exoligmos refines the timing. Other small dials relate to longer cycles and social calendars. The back of the machine is therefore not secondary. It is a dense landscape of long time. The front may have shown the more immediate movement of the sun and moon, but the rear holds the deep rhythms 19 years, 18 years, 54 years, 76 years. These are durations beyond daily life, beyond the ordinary memory of a single season. To turn the rear dials is to move through time on a scale that feels almost political, dynastic, ancestral. The eclipse system also helps answer why the mechanism was valuable. A device that could display ordinary dates might be useful. A device that could model the moon would be impressive. But a device that could point toward eclipses would carry special intellectual prestige. It demonstrates command over events that many people experience as sudden and ominous. For an elite owner, that knowledge could be a form of authority. For a teacher, it could be a dramatic demonstration of celestial order. For a philosopher, it could symbolize the intelligibility of the cosmos. For a collector, it could be a marvel worth showing. And yet the machine's predictive power was not mystical. This distinction is crucial. The Antikythera mechanism was not reading fate. It was applying astronomy. Later imaginations often blur ancient science with occult secrecy, but the surviving evidence points toward calculation, inscription, and mechanical modelling. The device is wondrous because it is rational, not because it escapes reason. Its mystery is not that eclipses were unknowable and the machine somehow knew them. Its mystery is that a damaged bronze object from a shipwreck preserves such a sophisticated ancient method of making them knowable. The Saros dial also reminds us how much ancient knowledge depended on long continuity. No one discovers an eclipse cycle from a handful of observations. It requires records across generations, careful attention to lunar months, and the preservation of pattern. The mechanism compresses that accumulated memory into gearwork. Behind each mark on the dial stand observers who watched the sky long before the machine was made, scribes who recorded events, scholars who compared intervals, and craftsmen who finally turned those intervals into bronze. The device is a collaboration across time. In that sense, the eclipse dial is almost a memory machine. It remembers future events by remembering past cycles. It tells the user that what has happened before may happen again, though shifted, delayed, displaced by the stubborn fractions of celestial motion. This way of thinking is deeply ancient and still recognizable. Humans survive partly by finding patterns in recurrent seasons, tides, migrations, rains, droughts, births, festivals, disasters. The Antikythera mechanism applies that instinct at a high level of technical refinement. It makes recurrence visible. The tragedy is that the machine itself did not escape a different kind of unpredictability. It could point toward eclipses decades away, but it could not predict the storm, collision, or navigational failure that sent it to the seabed. It contained cycles of the sky, but not the chaos of the sea. That contrast gives the object much of its emotional force. A device built to tame celestial uncertainty was destroyed by earthly accident. Its eclipse dial may have marked future darkness, but not its own. By the time modern scholars begin to decode the Saros system, the Antikythera mechanism has already shifted from curiosity to revelation. The eclipse predictions show that the device is not merely a calendar with gears. It is a sophisticated astronomical computer, in the ancient sense a machine that takes known cycles and produces readable results. The phrase can be overused, but here it has weight. The mechanism computes through motion. It does not store numbers electronically. It embodies them physically. Its answer appears as a pointer on a dial. So the eclipses in the box are more than a feature. They are a statement about the ancient mind's reach. The maker looked at events that could darken the world and found a cycle beneath them. He then built that cycle into bronze, small enough to carry, complex enough to challenge modern reconstruction, and durable enough, by accident, to survive 2,000 years under the sea. The result is not perfect knowledge, but it is profound knowledge. It shows a civilization trying to live in a universe where terror and order are not opposites, where the most frightening changes in the sky may still belong to a rhythm, and where even darkness can be given a place on a dial. The Antikythera mechanism is often described as unique, and in one obvious sense it is. No other surviving ancient machine matches it in preserved complexity, astronomical ambition, and mechanical sophistication. It stands alone in the archaeological record like a bronze island rising from a sea of absence. But uniqueness can mislead. An object may be unique because it was the only one ever made, or because all its relatives were destroyed. The mechanism's deepest challenge is that it looks less like a first attempt and more like the product of a tradition. Its gears do not feel like an isolated accident. They feel like an answer to problems people had already learned how to ask. A device this compact and coordinated requires more than inspiration. It requires techniques, habits, tools, and expectations. The maker must know how to cut gears with enough regularity for motion to transfer. He must understand how to stack wheels in a limited space, how to support axles, how to avoid interference, how to make displays readable, and how to connect a user's turning hand to several different outputs. These are not impossible skills, but they are developed skills. The mechanism suggests a background of experimentation that has almost entirely vanished from view. Ancient texts provide hints that such a background existed. Writers mention celestial spheres, automata, water clocks, mechanical birds, moving figures, and devices that model the heavens. Some accounts are difficult to interpret, and some may be exaggerated by later retelling, but they show that the ancient world could imagine and sometimes build complex mechanisms. The Antikythera mechanism is not floating in total darkness. It is the one surviving object that gives weight to a scattered written tradition. What had sounded like literary marvel becomes, in bronze, historically serious. The problem is survival. Bronze is valuable. If a machine breaks, it can be melted. If a workshop closes, its tools can be reused. If a library burns, the technical texts inside vanish. If a wooden case decays, the identity of an object may disappear even if a few metal pieces remain. The kinds of things that preserve well in archaeology are not always the things that best represent a society's technical imagination. Stone temples survive. Bronze instruments do not. The past is not silent because it had nothing to say. Often it is silent because its most fragile voices were the easiest to destroy. This is why the mechanism may be the visible tip of a lost mechanical tradition. Perhaps similar devices once existed in schools, courts, or private collections. Perhaps some were simpler calendar instruments, while others were more elaborate celestial displays. Perhaps a few were made for wealthy patrons who wanted not only art, but knowledge made tangible. Scholars still debate how broad this tradition was, because the evidence remains incomplete. But it is difficult to believe that the Antikythera mechanism appeared without predecessors. Its sophistication feels inherited. The ancient Greeks had already developed mathematical models of the heavens, and artisans had already developed mechanical devices for war, spectacle, measurement, and display. The missing link is not capacity but preservation. The mechanism shows that, at least once, these streams met in extraordinary form. If they met once, they may have met more than once. Yet the archaeological record gives almost nothing comparable. That absence creates the haunting impression of a library reduced to one page. There is a lesser-known point about gear technology itself. Simple gears are not inherently beyond ancient capability, and evidence for geared devices appears in later Roman and medieval contexts. What makes the Antikythera mechanism so striking is not the mere existence of gears, but their coordinated use in a mathematically meaningful system. It is one thing to transfer motion. It is another to encode the relation between lunar months, solar years, eclipse cycles, and lunar anomaly. The machine is not just mechanical, it is theoretical. Its gears are arguments. That may explain why such devices were never common. They required both specialized knowledge and a reason to build them. Most ancient communities did not need a portable eclipse calculator in daily life. Farmers needed seasons and local calendars. Sailors needed experience, stars, winds, and routes. Priests and officials needed ritual dates. A highly complex astronomical mechanism served a narrower world. Scholars, patrons, teachers, elite collectors, perhaps philosophical circles. Its rarity may reflect not technological inability, but limited demand. No single explanation fully accounts for the silence, but rarity and loss together are more plausible than impossibility. The lost tradition also forces a change in how ancient engineering is imagined. Modern people often associate machines with industry, mass production, and economic transformation. But ancient machines could belong to different priorities. They might demonstrate divine wonder in a temple, royal power in a court, mathematical truth in a school, or elite curiosity in a private setting. A machine did not have to become the seed of an industrial revolution to be sophisticated. It could remain a masterpiece within a narrow cultural niche. This is one reason the Antikythera mechanism did not change the ancient world in the way a modern invention might. It may not have been designed for mass use. It may have required too much labour, too much expertise, and too small an audience. Its existence does not mean antiquity was about to become mechanized in the modern sense. It means that within certain circles, ancient technical culture reached a level of precision and abstraction that the surviving record barely prepared us to see. The mechanism's isolation also reflects the fragility of transmission. Knowledge survives when people continue to value, copy, teach, and rebuild it. If a tradition depends on a few workshops, a handful of patrons, and perishable manuals, it can disappear quickly. War can kill specialists. Political change can end patronage. Economic decline can close workshops. New intellectual priorities can make old devices seem unnecessary. Once the chain breaks, later generations may remember only rumours. A sphere of Archimedes, a marvel of Rhodes, an old machine that showed the heavens. And rumours are not enough to preserve technique. A text can praise a device without explaining how to build it. A philosopher can admire a celestial model without recording gear tooth counts. An owner can display a machine without understanding its construction. Technical knowledge often lives in practice, in apprenticeship, in the repeated solving of small material problems. When practice stops, the knowledge thins. The Antikythera mechanism may preserve the result, but not the living tradition that made the result possible. This gives the object an almost archaeological loneliness. It is crowded inside with wheels, but historically it stands in an empty room. Around it should be prototypes, simpler instruments, workshop scraps, manuals, failed experiments, and later copies. Most of those are gone. The machine therefore bears too much explanatory weight. It has to prove not only itself, but the world behind itself. That is why every gear tooth matters so intensely. each one is evidence not just of a device, but of a vanished chain of skill. Yet the loneliness may also be an illusion created by the unevenness of survival. The Mediterranean seabed may hold other fragments. Museum storerooms may contain misidentified pieces. Ancient texts may preserve overlooked descriptions. Future scans, excavations, or reinterpretations may widen the picture. The mechanism teaches patience because it had misunderstood for so long. If one corroded lump could hide a cosmos, other fragments may hide smaller truths. For now, the lost tradition remains one of the most compelling explanations for the machine's existence. It allows the mechanism to be extraordinary without being impossible. It places it within known ancient science while admitting that the material record has failed us. It explains why the device appears mature, why its design is so integrated, and why its maker seems to have inherited more than he invented from nothing. But it also leaves the central ache unresolved if there was a tradition. Where did it go? The Antikythera mechanism is therefore not only a survivor from the ancient world, it is evidence of absence. It reveals by implication, like a single footprint in hardened mud, it proves that something passed this way, even if the body is gone. The gears tell us that ancient hands once learned to make the heavens move in miniature. The silence around them tells us how easily such mastery can disappear. And between the gears and the silence lies the shape of a lost mechanical world, glimpsed for a moment before history closes over it again. Knowledge rarely vanishes in a single dramatic instant. It does not usually disappear like a city swallowed whole by the sea or a palace burned in one night, even though history gives us plenty of fires and shipwrecks to remember. More often, knowledge thins. It loses patrons, then workshops, then teachers, then readers. A technique that once seemed valuable becomes expensive, obscure, or unnecessary. A manual is not copied. A specialist dies without a student. A device breaks and is melted for its metal. A library shelf is cleared. A court changes taste. A war interrupts trade. And after enough such moments, a living tradition becomes a rumour. The Antikythera mechanism may have survived because it was lost suddenly, but the world that could explain it seems to have vanished by slower means. The first danger is material. The mechanism was made largely of bronze, and bronze is never just an artifact in the ancient world. It is also stored value. Broken bronze can become new bronze. A damaged astronomical instrument, if no one nearby understands or values it, can be recast into a mirror, a fitting, a coin, a tool, a weapon, or a statue. The very material that allows the Antikythera mechanism to preserve gear teeth also makes comparable devices unlikely to survive. Stone ruins remain because stone is stubborn and often too heavy to reuse completely. Bronze invites transformation. This means the archaeological record is biased against exactly the kinds of delicate metal machines we most want to find. Wood is worse. The mechanism's case, probably essential to its original appearance and use, is almost entirely gone. If similar devices existed and were not shipwrecked under unusual conditions, their wooden parts would vanish quickly. Even the bronze pieces might scatter or be recycled. A complete machine could become, within a few generations, an unrecognizable handful of scrap. The absence of evidence is not meaningless, but in this case it must be weighed against the harsh reality of preservation. The evidence remains incomplete because the materials themselves were vulnerable. The second danger is social. A machine like this requires a culture that supports specialized knowledge. It needs people who care about mathematical astronomy, patrons willing to pay for elite craftsmanship, artisans trained to build precise mechanisms, and users educated enough to understand the displays. If any part of that chain weakens, production becomes difficult. The late Hellenistic world provided many of these conditions: competitive royal courts, wealthy cities, scholarly centres, and a shared prestige around Greek learning. But those conditions changed. Rome absorbed kingdoms, patronage shifted, wars disrupted cities, libraries and schools survived in some forms, but the old networks were altered. Roman culture admired Greek knowledge, but admiration is not the same as sustaining every technical tradition. Greek art was collected intensely. Greek philosophy remained prestigious. Greek medicine, rhetoric, and literature continued to matter. But a highly specialized geared astronomical instrument may have occupied a narrower space. It may have been impressive to own, but difficult to reproduce. If the craftsmen and scholars who knew how to build such devices were few, the tradition could fade even while broader Greek learning continued. No single explanation fully accounts for the disappearance, but narrow expertise is always fragile. War is another pressure. The Hellenistic Mediterranean is brilliant, but it is not peaceful. Cities are besieged, kingdoms fight, Roman armies intervene, pirates threaten trade, political centres rise and fall, Syracuse is captured, Corinth is destroyed and refounded. Mithridatic wars shake the eastern Mediterranean. Civil wars tear through the Roman Republic. These events do not have to target scientific instruments specifically to damage the world that makes them. A workshop burned in a siege leaves little trace. A patron killed or bankrupted ends commissions. A teacher displaced loses students. A cargo ship sinks, and with it perhaps one of only a few machines of its kind. There is also the loss of texts. Ancient technical writing survives unevenly because survival depends on copying. A scroll does not endure for 2,000 years in ordinary Mediterranean conditions, unless it is repeatedly recopied or preserved by exceptional circumstances. Scribes copy what institutions and readers consider valuable. Mathematical and astronomical texts did survive in part, but technical manuals for constructing devices may have been less likely to be copied, especially if they required diagrams, workshop knowledge, or practical apprenticeship to make sense. A description of a celestial sphere might survive as a marvel. The detailed instructions for cutting and assembling its gears might not. This distinction matters. Knowing that a device exists is not the same as knowing how to make one. Later writers could praise ancient machines without preserving their technical substance. They could inherit admiration while losing practice. The Antikythera mechanism is full of decisions that would have been difficult to transmit by words alone: spacing, tolerances, gear thickness, axle placement, dial layout, pointer design, repair methods. Such knowledge lives in hands as much as in texts. When the hands are gone, the words may not be enough. The third danger is intellectual fashion. Ancient and medieval scholars did not all value the same kinds of knowledge in the same way across time. Astronomy remained important, but the form it took changed. Mathematical models could be preserved in writing without requiring mechanical embodiment. Philosophical and religious concerns could shift attention away from devices. Astrology, calendar computation, and observational astronomy continued in various traditions. But a complex bronze demonstrator may have seemed less necessary than tables, diagrams, and texts. A machine is expensive and breakable. A table can be copied. For many purposes, writing wins. There is a surprising irony here. The Antikythera mechanism impresses modern people because it is mechanical, but that very mechanical form may have made it less likely to survive as a tradition. Tables of eclipse cycles can be recopied. Geometrical models can be discussed. planetary theories can be incorporated into later astronomy. A bronze machine requires material investment and specialized construction. It is knowledge made heavy. Heavy knowledge can drown, rust, break, and be sold as scrap. The rise of Roman imperial order did not destroy Greek science outright. That would be too crude. Many Greek intellectual traditions continued under Roman rule, and later scholars in the Eastern Mediterranean preserved and developed mathematical astronomy. But continuity in one domain does not guarantee continuity in all. The specific craft of building geared astronomical calculators may have had little institutional protection. It may have remained a luxury art, admired by elites but not essential to administration or economy. If so, it could vanish without leaving a clear historical scar. Later centuries bring further disruptions, economic changes, political fragmentation, epidemics, warfare, shifts in education, and the transformation of religious and philosophical institutions all affect what gets preserved. The ancient Mediterranean does not fall silent overnight, and it is misleading to imagine a single collapse erasing all technical skill. Yet specialized traditions can disappear inside broader continuity. A city may still teach grammar while losing a school of instrument makers. A monastery may copy astronomy while ignoring mechanical manuals. A court may sponsor astrologers while not commissioning bronze gearwork. The story is not simply one of decline. Mechanical knowledge reappears and develops in other contexts. In the medieval Islamic world, scholars and engineers create sophisticated astronomical instruments, automata, water clocks, and geared devices. Later European astronomical clocks and planetaria build their own traditions of mechanical modelling. The Antikythera mechanism is not the direct ancestor of every later machine in a simple unbroken line. The evidence for transmission is too uncertain. But its existence shows that the idea of representing celestial cycles mechanically had deep roots. Whether later traditions inherited fragments of that knowledge or reinvented much of it remains debated. What is clear is that the Antikythera tradition, whatever its exact scale, did not leave a continuous visible chain. Somewhere between the Hellenistic workshops and the later medieval world, the line breaks or becomes too faint to follow. The machine becomes not a beginning of modern machinery, but a lost summit in an ancient landscape. That may be more haunting. Progress is not a smooth staircase. Human knowledge can climb, plateau, branch, and collapse. Skills can be reached and then forgotten. An invention can be brilliant without becoming inevitable. The Antikythera mechanism therefore warns against a simple view of history where every discovery naturally leads forward. Sometimes a discovery belongs to conditions that do not last. Sometimes the right combination of theory, craft, money, and curiosity appears briefly, produces wonders, and then dissolves. The machine was not enough by itself to create a technological revolution. It needed a world around it, and that world changed. By the time the mechanism is lying under the sea, its future is already severed from its maker. It will not be repaired. It will not be copied by whoever was waiting for it. It will not sit in a school or villa turning the sky for students and guests. The shipwreck removes it from history at the same moment it preserves it for archaeology. Above the wreck, empires rise and split, languages shift, religions transform, libraries burn or decay. And new scholars look at the heavens with different tools. The machine remains below, holding within its broken frame a form of knowledge that the surface world gradually misplaces. That is why its disappearance feels larger than one artifact. It is the disappearance of a relationship between mind and material, between astronomy and craft. The Antikythera mechanism proves that ancient people could build a machine of celestial calculation, but it also proves how little protection brilliance has against time. Bronze can corrode, wood can rot, institutions can fail, names can vanish, and when the chain of practice breaks, even a civilization's most delicate achievements may survive only by accident, sealed in darkness, waiting for strangers to learn how to read them again. For much of its modern life, the Antikythera mechanism is a machine people can see without truly seeing. Its fragments sit in museum care, recognized as important, studied by specialists, photographed, described, and debated. Yet the most essential parts remain hidden inside the corroded bronze. The human eye can follow exposed teeth and broken plates only so far. A scholar can measure visible surfaces, compare inscriptions, and infer missing elements. But the machine's deepest evidence is trapped within the very material that preserved it. To understand it properly, modern researchers have to learn how to look through bronze. The first great leap comes through radiography. X-rays allow investigators to see internal structures that cannot be safely exposed by cutting or cleaning. Suddenly, the mechanism is not only a surface puzzle. Gear wheels buried inside corrosion become visible. Tooth counts can be estimated more accurately. Hidden inscriptions begin to emerge. The machine, once flattened into the appearance of a damaged lump, gains depth again. This is one of the quiet miracles of modern archaeology. Not treasure hunting, not dramatic excavation, but better seeing. Later, imaging takes the work further. Computed tomography, high-resolution photography, reflectance techniques, and digital modelling allow scholars to read faint letters and trace gear arrangements with far greater precision. The fragments are scanned in layers. Corrosion becomes data. Interior shapes can be mapped without destroying the object. The ancient machine is translated into modern images, and those images become the new terrain of debate. The Antikythera mechanism, built to calculate the sky, now depends on machines that calculate density, angle, shadow, and form. This creates a strange meeting across time. Hellenistic craftsmanship and 21st century technology collaborate without ever intending to. The ancient maker cut gears by hand. Modern scanners reveal them by computation. The ancient engraver carved tiny letters into bronze. Modern imaging makes them legible after 2,000 years of damage. The original user turned a handle to explore celestial cycles. Modern researchers rotate digital models on screens. The device becomes understandable only when ancient precision meets modern precision. One of the major results of this technological work is the recovery of inscriptions that earlier scholars could barely detect. The text on the plates and fragments helps confirm functions, identify cycles, and reveal how the device explained itself. Words connected with months, eclipses, celestial bodies, and display instructions become clearer. Even partial readings can reshape reconstructions. A few letters may support the interpretation of a dial. A phrase may suggest how a user understood a pointer. The evidence remains incomplete, but the amount recovered from such damaged material is astonishing. The scans also help clarify the gear trains. Counting teeth is essential because the gear ratios encode astronomical cycles. If a gear has a certain number of teeth, and it meshes with another gear of a certain number, their relationship can express a mathematical period. Modern imaging makes it possible to identify wheels that are partly hidden, broken, or fused. This does not remove all uncertainty. Some gears are missing, and some counts remain debated. But the internal architecture becomes far more intelligible than it was when scholars relied mainly on visible inspection. A lesser-known detail is that reconstruction is not merely visual. researchers build physical and digital models to test whether proposed arrangements can actually work. A gear train may look plausible on paper, but inside a compact box it must fit. Wheels must clear each other. Axles must align. Pointers must reach dials. Ratios must produce the right motions. The mechanism forces scholars to think like both historians and engineers. A beautiful hypothesis fails if the bronze would jam. Modern reconstructions vary in detail, especially regarding the front display, but they share a basic respect for mechanical constraint. The surviving rear dials and gear trains can be modelled with increasing confidence. The lunar anomaly mechanism, with its elegant pin and slot arrangement, becomes one of the most celebrated features. The eclipse prediction system gains clarity. The Metonic and Saros spirals become readable as parts of a coherent design. What once seemed almost impossibly advanced becomes mechanically understandable, though no less impressive. Technology also changes the emotional status of the artifact. Early viewers could marvel at the idea of ancient gears, but modern imaging reveals intention at a finer scale. The machine is not impressive in a vague way. It is impressive in specific ways, a particular ratio here, a compact solution there, an inscription placed where a user would need it, a correction for an astronomical remainder, a display that balances long cycles against limited space. The mystery becomes sharper because the evidence becomes sharper. At the same time, new evidence does not end disagreement. It often makes disagreement more sophisticated. Scholars may agree that a gear existed but debate what it drove. They may agree on a reading but differ on what it implies for the front display. They may agree that planetary references appear in inscriptions while disagreeing over whether the original machine showed all 5 planets mechanically. Modern scans do not turn the mechanism into a solved puzzle. They turn it into a better defined puzzle. No single explanation fully accounts for every fragment, and responsible reconstructions continue to mark the boundary between known, probable, possible, and speculative. The front of the mechanism remains especially difficult. Some recent models propose complex arrangements for planetary motions, showing how such a system might fit and function. These reconstructions are valuable because they test ancient possibilities against mechanical reality. But possibility is not the same as certainty. The surviving evidence for the front is too fragmentary to settle all details beyond dispute. This uncertainty is not a weakness of the field. It is the honest result of working with a damaged object. The machine allows insight, but it does not surrender completely. The museum setting adds another layer. The fragments are now protected, stabilized, and displayed as treasures of ancient technology. Yet their public appearance can still underwhelm anyone expecting a gleaming machine. The real mechanism remains visually difficult, greenish, broken, irregular, more like a mineral specimen than a working instrument. Much of its drama now lives in reconstructions, diagrams, scans, and animations. The original object is quiet. It asks visitors to imagine what cannot be seen directly. That gap between fragment and reconstruction is important. A reconstruction can restore motion, colour, and clarity, but it can also create false confidence if presented too smoothly. The actual artifact is damaged. The restored machine is an argument based on evidence. Good reconstructions make that distinction clear. They show not only what may have been, but which parts are preserved and which are inferred. In this way, the Antikythera mechanism teaches the public how archaeology works at its best, not by guessing wildly, but by building careful bridges from fragment to function. Modern study has also made the mechanism famous beyond academic circles. It is called an ancient computer, a phrase that can be useful if understood carefully. It computed by gears, not electronics. It processed astronomical cycles through mechanical ratios, not software. The term captures its function as a calculating device, but it can mislead if it makes the object sound modern in disguise. The mechanism belongs fully to antiquity. Its brilliance is not that it resembles a laptop, but that it shows an ancient way of mechanizing knowledge. The modern eye, aided by scanners and models, has therefore not stripped away the mystery. It has rescued the mystery from vagueness. The question is no longer whether the object contains gears, or whether those gears mattered. They did. The questions now are more precise: how complete was the front display? Where exactly was it made? How many similar devices existed? Who used it? How was it taught? And why did the tradition fade? Technology has moved the discussion from astonishment toward disciplined wonder. There is something fitting in this. A machine built to reveal hidden order in the sky is itself revealed by instruments that find hidden order in matter. X-rays pass through corrosion, as ancient theory once passed through appearances. CT scans reconstruct layers as astronomers reconstructed cycles. Digital models turn fragments into motion, as the original gears turned numbers into time. The Antikythera mechanism has become both an ancient artifact and a modern collaboration, still changing as methods improve. And so, after 2,000 years in the sea and more than a century in modern study, the machine continues to move, not physically in its original bronze, but intellectually. Each scan turns another invisible surface toward the light. Each reading of a letter gives the ancient voice another syllable. Each reconstruction tests whether the lost machine could really have done what the evidence suggests. Modern eyes have not made the Antikythera mechanism ordinary. They have made it stranger in the best possible way, no longer a vague impossibility, but a real, damaged, measurable object whose sophistication can be followed tooth by tooth. The more clearly the Antikythera mechanism comes into view, the harder it becomes to reduce it to one simple purpose. It is tempting to give it a clean label and be done: a calculator, a planetarium, a teaching instrument, a luxury object, a calendar machine, an astronomical computer. Each label captures something true, but none captures everything. The machine seems to sit at the intersection of use, display, education, prestige, and philosophy. It was not built merely to look mysterious. It was built to do work, but the work it did may have been intellectual and social as much as practical. If it was a teaching instrument, its design makes immediate sense. A teacher could turn the mechanism and show how lunar months relate to solar years, how eclipses return, how the moon changes phase, and how long cycles can be tracked through orderly motion. The inscriptions would guide explanation. The moving pointers would make abstract astronomy visible. In a world without screens, printed diagrams, or planetarium domes, a compact moving model of celestial cycles would be a powerful educational tool. It could allow a student not only to hear about the order of the heavens, but to watch that order unfold under a human hand. If it was a prestige object, that also fits. The mechanism would have been expensive, specialized, and impressive. A wealthy owner could display it as proof of learning, taste, and access to elite craftsmanship. Roman aristocrats prized Greek art and intellectual culture, and an astronomical machine would belong to that atmosphere of cultivated possession. It would not need to be useful in a narrow daily sense to be valuable. It could be a conversation piece, a symbol of command over difficult knowledge, a private marvel that demonstrated the owner's place in a world of educated refinement. If it was a practical calendar tool, its dials support that possibility as well. Calendars mattered deeply in ancient life. Festivals, civic duties, agricultural rhythms, religious observances, and athletic games depended on shared timekeeping. A machine that coordinated lunar months, solar years, and recurring events could have real utility. Yet it was probably too elaborate and rare to be an ordinary administrative tool. A city did not need a bronze masterpiece for everyday calendrical management. Tables, officials, and local traditions could do much of that work. The mechanism's practical use may have existed, but practicality alone does not explain its elegance. If it was an astronomical calculator, a phrase is accurate when handled carefully. It took cycles and converted them into positions and predictions. It allowed a user to move forward or backward through time. It mechanized relationships that otherwise would be written, calculated, or remembered. But it was not a general-purpose computer. It did not solve any problem fed into it. It was a specialized machine, designed around selected astronomical and calendrical cycles. Its intelligence was built into its structure. The user did not program it. The maker had already programmed it in bronze. There is also the possibility that it had a philosophical role. Greek astronomy was not only about dates and predictions, it was tied to deeper ideas about order, harmony, recurrence, and the intelligibility of nature. A machine that makes the heavens move in miniature could become a material argument the cosmos is not chaos. The sky has pattern, and the human mind can grasp that pattern through mathematics. No single explanation fully accounts for its purpose, because sophisticated objects often carry several meanings at once. The mechanism may have taught, calculated, impressed, and symbolized all at the same time. The inscriptions strengthen this mixed interpretation. They suggest a user who needed guidance, which fits teaching or demonstration. The complex gearwork suggests serious calculation, which fits astronomical use. The fine craftsmanship and rec context suggest elite ownership, which fits prestige. The game's dial connects celestial time to human institutions, which fits a broader cultural function. The mechanism is not a tool stripped of meaning, nor a symbol stripped of function. It is both. One lesser-known point is that ancient instruments often lived in social settings. Knowledge was performed. A learned person might explain a diagram, demonstrate a device, recite a calculation, or display a model before students, friends, patrons, or guests. The Antikythera mechanism may have worked best not in solitude, but in demonstration. Someone turns the handle, someone else watches the moon move, the dial advance, the eclipse mark approach. The machine becomes a shared experience of order. That social dimension is difficult to prove archaeologically, but it fits the object's design and cultural world. It also may explain why the device includes more than one kind of time. A purely technical astronomer might not need a game's dial beside eclipse cycles. A purely civic calendar might not need lunar anomaly. A purely decorative marvel might not need dense technical inscriptions. The mechanism combines them because ancient learned culture did not divide time as sharply as modern institutions do. The sky, the city, the festival, the school, the patron's house, and the philosophical imagination all belong to one world. The machine maps that world through cycles. The question of navigation sometimes appears in popular accounts, but it should be treated carefully. The mechanism was found on a ship, and it concerns the sky, so the idea of a navigational instrument is tempting, yet the evidence does not strongly support its use as a practical shipboard navigation tool. It is too complex, delicate, and focused on long cycles rather than immediate position finding at sea. Ancient sailors certainly used celestial knowledge, but the Antikythera mechanism seems better understood as an astronomical and calendrical device than as equipment for steering a vessel. Its presence on the ship likely reflects transport, ownership, or trade, not use during the voyage. Another disputed idea is that it was a kind of astrological instrument. Ancient astronomy and astrology were often connected, and planetary and lunar information could be used in astrological contexts. But the surviving evidence does not make the mechanism a horoscope machine in any simple sense. It tracks cycles and celestial positions. How a user interpreted those outputs may have varied. It is safest to say that the device belonged to a world where astronomical knowledge could serve many purposes, including calendrical, educational, philosophical, and possibly astrological ones, without reducing the whole machine to one of them. Its purpose may also have changed over time. An object can be made for one reason and used for another. A teaching instrument can become a collector's treasure. A scholar's device can become a patron's display piece. A prestige object can still be used seriously by someone who understands it. By the time it was loaded onto the doomed ship, the mechanism may have already had a history. It may have passed from maker to owner, from school to collection, from Greek context to Roman possession. The evidence remains incomplete, but such movement would fit the world of the wreck. In the end, the most convincing answer is not a single category, but a layered one. The Antikythera mechanism was a mechanical model of astronomical and calendrical cycles, probably used for demonstration, instruction, calculation, and elite display. It made the sky readable. It transformed long periods into motion. It connected heavenly events with human calendars. It showed that the cosmos could be represented by mathematics and craft. That is less tidy than calling it one thing, but it is closer to the truth. The machine's purpose, then, was not merely to predict, it was to reveal. It revealed relationships between cycles that are otherwise hard to hold in the mind. It revealed that eclipses belong to pattern. It revealed that lunar and solar time can be reconciled, though imperfectly. It revealed that human festivals sit inside larger rhythms. It revealed, perhaps most importantly, that knowledge can be made into an object. That may be why the mechanism still feels alive, even broken. A purely practical tool becomes obsolete when its function is replaced. A symbolic object can lose force when its symbols fade. But the Antikythera mechanism continues to matter because it occupies the space between them. It is useful and symbolic, technical and beautiful, ancient and strangely familiar. It is not only a machine for calculating time, it is a machine for showing that time has structure and that human beings, briefly and brilliantly, can build something that lets them touch that structure with their hands. The Antikythera mechanism leaves behind an uneasy legacy because it is neither simple proof of a lost golden age nor a curiosity that can be safely placed at the edge of history. It stands in the middle, where it is much harder to ignore. It tells us that ancient science was not only speculative, not only literary, not only a matter of philosophers staring at the stars and arguing about circles. It could be material, precise, compact, and engineered. It could live inside a wooden case with bronze gears and tiny engraved instructions. It could turn celestial theory into motion, and motion into readable time. That realization changes the emotional scale of the ancient world. The Hellenistic Mediterranean becomes less distant, less static, less easily summarized. It is no longer enough to imagine ancient knowledge as a sequence of texts and names, with practical machinery waiting for a later age. The mechanism shows a world where mathematics and craftsmanship could meet with startling confidence. It forces a correction in the modern imagination. The past was not primitive simply because much of its technology did not survive. It was uneven, brilliant, fragile, and capable of achievements that could vanish almost completely. Yet the machine also resists romantic exaggeration. It does not prove that antiquity possessed modern science in secret. It does not show that ancient engineers were on the verge of steam engines, electronics, or industrial production. It does not require lost continents, impossible civilizations, or visitors from the stars. Those ideas flatten the real achievement by making it less human. The truth is more impressive within the known world of Greek astronomy, Hellenistic mathematics, elite patronage, and skilled bronze work. Someone built a machine of extraordinary sophistication. The wonder is not that it came from outside history. The wonder is that history was large enough to contain it. This is why the Antikythera mechanism remains unsettling. It fits, but not comfortably. It belongs to the ancient world, but it reveals a part of that world for which the surrounding evidence is thin. It is supported by known traditions, yet it stands almost alone as a surviving object. It answers the question of whether such a machine could exist, then immediately asks why more have not been found. Scholars still debate its maker, its precise origin, its full front display, the breadth of the tradition behind it, and the purposes it served across its lifetime. No single explanation fully accounts for its presence on that ship, its level of complexity, and the near-total disappearance of comparable devices. The mechanism also changes the meaning of loss. Often, vanished history is imagined in terms of monuments, ruined cities, broken temples, collapsed empires, abandoned roads. But here loss is small enough to hold a box, a set of gears, a few plates, a corroded fragment with letters nearly too tiny to read. It reminds us that civilizations do not only leave behind walls and statues, they leave behind methods, habits, instruments, and ways of thinking. When those vanish, the loss can be almost invisible until a fragment returns. There is a strange humility in that. Modern people often assume that the direction of knowledge is obvious, that the present stands securely above the past. The Antikythera mechanism does not overturn modern science, but it does disturb modern arrogance. It shows that intelligence is not the property of one era. It appears wherever conditions allow it, in observatories, workshops, libraries, courts, shipyards, and classrooms, in the patience of observers, in the hand of an engraver, in the mind that sees a lunar cycle not only as a number, but as a wheel. The machine's legacy is also a warning about evidence. History is not the same as what survives. The record is filtered by fire, water, decay, recycling, conquest, fashion, and luck. If the Antikythera wreck had not been found, a major part of ancient mechanical astronomy would be far easier to underestimate. If the corroded fragments had been discarded or misunderstood, the story would be poorer. If the scans had never been made, much of the device would still be hidden. What survives in the record suggests brilliance, but it also suggests how close that brilliance came to being lost without a trace. And still, after all the scanning, modelling, debate and reconstruction, the machine keeps part of itself. The original case is gone, the complete face is gone, the maker's name is gone, the workshop is gone, the owner is gone, the moment of shipwreck is gone except as wreckage. The mechanism gives enough to transform history, but not enough to end curiosity. That is part of its power. A fully explained object can become a closed exhibit. The Antikythera mechanism remains open. Its legacy is therefore not only technological, it is imaginative, but in a disciplined way. It invites us to imagine ancient people as capable of subtlety without turning them into fantasy figures. It invites us to see science as a human craft, dependent on materials and institutions, not just on ideas. It invites us to remember that knowledge can be made, lost, recovered, and misunderstood. It shows that a civilization's most astonishing achievements may not be the largest ones. Sometimes they are small, fragile, and carried on a ship that never reaches port. In the end, the Antikythera mechanism is a machine of cycles that became a symbol of rupture. It modelled recurrence, but its own tradition broke. It predicted eclipses, but not its disappearance. It joined human calendars to celestial rhythms, then spent 2,000 years outside human time, buried in the sea. When it returned, it did not return complete. It returned as a challenge to look again at the ancient world, to distrust easy timelines, to separate wonder from exaggeration, and to accept that the past may still contain machines we do not know how to expect. The broken bronze rests now in a museum, far from the storm and the seabed, but it still carries the silence of both. Around it, people move through rooms of glass and labels, pausing before statues, coins, vessels, and fragments of lives arranged by century. The mechanism does not dazzle in the way polished treasure dazzles. It asks for patience. It asks the eye to slow down, to imagine motion where there is none, to see a sky inside corrosion. Perhaps that is the right ending for it. A machine made to display time has become an object that teaches the depth of time. It passed from a workshop into a ship, from a ship into the sea into a museum, from mystery into partial understanding. Each stage removed something and revealed something else. The salt took its surfaces but saved its secret. The wreck destroyed its use but preserved its evidence. Modern science recovered its hidden form but could not restore the world that made it. And beyond the glass, the cycles continue without needing bronze to carry them. The moon still changes its face. The sun still moves through the seasons as seen from Earth. Eclipses still gather their shadows and pass over oceans, deserts, cities, and fields. Human beings still look upward and try to turn awe into pattern. That impulse is older than the machine and will outlast every reconstruction of it. The Antikythera mechanism remains with us because it is both answer and absence. It proves that someone once built a working model of celestial time in bronze, and it reminds us how completely a tradition can fade. It is a survivor from a shoreline where knowledge, wealth, craft, and chance met for a moment, then sank. So the final image is not of gears turning smoothly in a restored box, though they once may have done exactly that. It is of the dark Aegean floor, quiet after the wreck, with statues lying like drowned witnesses and a small machine settling into sand. Above it, the real heavens continue their vast motion. Below, inside a broken case, a smaller heaven waits, silent, corroding, and not yet finished with history.